Chapter 282. Inside one of the living rooms within the mansion, Miss Amy and Gustav sat opposite each other. "Now, ask me what you want to know," Miss Amy said to Gustav. Gustav stared at her for a few seconds before replying. "I want to know who the real Miss Amy is." "Tell me everything," Gustav voiced out as he placed his chin on his knuckles, which were being supported by his elbows that were placed on his thighs as he sat. "Of course, I can't tell you everything, but I will clear your doubts and make things less confusing," Miss Amy replied. Gustav nodded slightly in response as he waited for Miss Amy to start speaking. "But we're trading secrets, so I expect you to also reveal some things to me after I'm done," Miss Amy added. Gustav was already expecting this, and he didn't see any problem with letting Miss Amy know. She already knew he could use different kinds of abilities, so he only had to straighten a few more things out. By now, it was obvious that Miss Amy meant no harm, so trusting her wouldn't be a bad thing. "All right," Gustav responded. After Gustav gave affirmation, Miss Amy started to explain from somewhere close to the beginning. Miss Amy narrating her story from when she was still a kid. She happened to awaken her bloodline since she was an infant, which was unseen and unheard of. She practically turned the cradle she was placed in into a tree. It grew leaves and branches. Amy was born into a prestigious military family that had a good standing in the MBO, so this was good news for her father. From that day, he decided that Amy would be a part of the MBO when she grew big enough. He started training Amy on how to use her bloodline from the age of 3. Not only was it forceful training, but whenever she failed to complete tasks, she would be dealt with mercilessly by her father. He was mostly concerned about his reputation and wanted Amy to do well, so she could outshine all of her peers, which she eventually did. Amy grew to understand that society only cared about power and having a great bloodline. These two things determine how you were going to be addressed by others. Amy's mother was the only person she would always run to because she only had hate for her father, who was objectifying her. Her mother treated her nicely and always told her to grow up to be whatever she wanted, and she didn't have to play by the rules of everyone. Her mother always advised and comforted her while listening to all her worries and complaints. In her eyes, her mother was the only person who wasn't objectifying her and wanted her to truly live a happy and uncontrolled life. Her mother, who had a low bloodline, was treated like a pile of poop by the entire household, even when she managed to mother someone as talented as Amy. The only difference was after everyone found out Amy was a genius, the discrimination reduced. However, due to poor feeding and treatment over the past years, even though her mother was now being treated better, she fell ill. The maltreatment had nurtured a sickness inside her that was slowly taking her life away. Eventually, Amy's mother passed away. This broke Amy and made her hate bloodlines. As she grew up to be powerful, she turned cold and heartless to anyone with bloodline abilities. Miss Amy was said to hate mixed bloods, but the truth was she only hated bloodlines and wished they didn't exist. She had read about how humans in the past were powerless and only had weaponry. She wished the world could be like that again without discrimination, but she didn't care anymore because her reason for caring was gone. So her hate was transferred to the mixed bloods who carried bloodlines. At the age of 11, she got enlisted into the MBO camp. She entered before she was done with the 4 years of training because within that time, she had successfully completed lots of missions that were issued to cadets who were still undergoing training. She ended up being placed in a squad before those 4 years were up. Amy's bloodline was said to be B grade, which was a little common in the MBO, but she was stronger than others for some reason. Battle prowess, making use of her abilities, and dealing with opponents made her stand out. When Amy was 16 years of age, she became a captain of an emergency squad that got sent to different places to assist in battles when the situation had gotten out of hand. This was where Miss Amy earned the title Demon Queen. Miss Amy was totally ruthless in taking the enemies down and sacrificing her own subordinates to get the job done. She would sacrifice a teammate without batting an eyelid if it meant getting the job done, and she always did things in the most gruesome way possible. When tales of her deeds spread far and wide across the MBO, a fellow captain who happened to be more powerful than her at that time approached her with the intention of knocking some sense into her. Instead, he left with a broken skull. He had an A-grade bloodline and was even 2 levels above Miss Amy, yet she defeated him easily. The next one that came to try and do the same had his limbs uprooted by her. By the time she dealt with several of them, no one had bothered to try meddling in her affairs anymore. For some unknown reasons, the higher-ups also didn't take any measures. Other MBO officers only prayed to not be put in her squad. For up to 6 years, Miss Amy fought battles and successfully completed each and every single mission assigned to her by the MBO. However, the price paid in those 6 years was something the MBO finally decided to do something about. In those 6 years, Miss Amy had grown so powerful rapidly that even the higher-ups became worried. They also wondered if she was just a B grade. Other MBO officers apart from Miss Amy were also popular and well known for their feats and strength. However, Miss Amy's case was always a topic that put fear in the hearts of other MBO officers, making her a more discussed topic. The higher-ups called Miss Amy in and decided to try and put a leash on her free reign. Chapter 283. 3 out of the 5 great commanders were also present, along with an MBO officer named Mac Fraser. This man was hailed as the most powerful MBO officer. Amy had never even met him before, since they were never in the same place at the same time. However, she had heard about him, and he had heard about her. Miss Amy listened to their restraining order and gave them all cold looks before raising her middle finger and heading for the door. "Mac, restrain her." These were the next words she heard coming from one of the great commanders. "Sigh, what a drag. You called me all the way out here to deal with an ordinary alpha ranked," Mac Fraser voiced out with a look of boredom. "Watch your tongue. She's no ordinary alpha," one of the great commanders voiced out. Mac Fraser yawned before standing to his feet, but the moment he did that, a loud blast occurred, and half of the building was blown away. When the dust in the air cleared, Mac was back on his seat, leaning his jaw on his fist with a more bored expression on his face than he had before. "We didn't ask you to destroy the building." "Idiot," one of them voiced out again as they stared at the open space in front of them. "Mission complete, there she is," Mac said while pointing at the ground in front. Miss Amy was lying on the ground, unconscious. The 3 great commanders present nodded. As expected, even though she's really powerful, she's no match for him. These thoughts appeared in their minds as 2 officers moved over to pick Miss Amy up. Unexpectedly, they stopped when they were only a few feet away due to an invisible force pressing against them. Shuram, purple-like aura covered Miss Amy as she floated upwards and opened her eyes to stare at Mac with a chilling gaze. Mac was shocked as his eyes widened, and he stared at Miss Amy. She regained consciousness. "No, she's not even injured." Smirk. "She is the first to take my fist without getting injured in the slightest. Even though I only used a small fraction of my power, this might be fun," he thought. The higher-ups and great commanders present were extremely shocked. Why is she using a different power entirely from her original? They wondered. The entire environment was drowned in an unfathomable pressure as both Mac and Amy dashed towards each other. Swayaya, swayaya, boom. The entire vicinity disintegrated the moment they came into contact with each other. "Wait, Miss Amy has more than one bloodline?" Gustav asked with a look of confusion as he cut into her narration. "Yes, I have 2 bloodlines, which is the reason I'm this powerful with 2 B-grade bloodlines," Miss Amy confirmed. Gustav had widened eyes as he heard this. "She hid it so well and never even made use of it, even once when training me." Gustav had a look of amazement as he heard that. "Also, Miss Amy is an alpha-ranked mixed blood and not a kilo-ranked. Gustav asked with astonishment. That was 3 years back. I improved a little after that. Miss Amy answered bluntly. She's practically at the pinnacle. Gustav remembered the bloodline, ranks to be Zulu Serial Gilbert, Marshall Falcon, Echo Kilo Delta Beta, Alpha Beacon Evolver. Each rank had 4 steps. These were levels said to have been attained by the most powerful mixed bloods in the past who passed down this ranking. However, there were rumors that it didn't end here. 50% of mixed bloods in the entire world are unable to surpass the serial rank. 30% manage to make it to the Marshall and Falcon rank. A mixed blood would be known as a powerhouse if they managed to make it to this rank. Around 10% were able to make it to the Kilo and Delta rank, which were known to be among the powerful in the entire world. The mixed bloods that managed to reach this point were mostly in high places of authority. They weren't seen as normal people, neither were they normal people in society. Less than 1% of the mixed bloods in the entire world reached the alpha ranked, which was considered the pinnacle for all mixed bloods in this age. For hundreds of years, no one had been able to surpass this rank. Even the 5 great commanders were stuck in this rank along with Miss Amy. Only one person was an exception, and that was Mac Fraenzer, the only mixed blood in the last 500 years to make it to the Beacon rank. He was the most powerful mixed blood on the entire planet, and the number of battles he had lived through, along with the successful missions and planet conquering, added to his name, added to his fame. According to a lot of MBO officers, he had never had to throw another punch when battling with a person because it always ended up with an instant win. According to others, he didn't even need to act to defeat an opponent. Some exaggerated his strength and added that a single sneeze of his could part the oceans. The alpha rank was already godlike to others, but it was nothing compared to the Beacon rank. Hold on, Miss Amy is only around 25 years old. So how did she achieve this in such a short period? Gustav wondered as he stared at Miss Amy. So, Miss Amy, how did the fight with him end? Gustav decided to ask the most mind-boggling question. Since I'm still here, I obviously didn't lose. Miss Amy voiced out. So that means... Gustav's eyes widened slightly in astonishment, but Miss Amy interrupted before he could complete his statement, but he didn't lose either. We had to stop halfway since the base was getting destroyed each time we collided. Miss Amy added, So how is it that you are Kilo ranked right now? And how are you still affiliated with the MBO even if you're no longer a part of them? Gustav inquired with a confused expression. That's because we came to a kind of agreement. Great Commander Cheyenne has arrived. Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, the AI installed within the mansion made an announcement. Chapter 284. That's because we came to a kind of agreement. Great Commander Cheyenne has arrived. Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, the AI installed within the mansion made an announcement. Miss Amy paused her speech after hearing that before standing to her feet. Well, continue our chat later. It's time for you to meet one of the 5 great commanders, Miss Amy said towards Gustav while gesturing for him to follow her. They walked out of the second living room and arrived at the corridor that led to the luxurious stairway. From above, Gustav could see a man with white hair and beard sitting on a 3-seater sofa in the middle of a lineup of about 4 sofas. He had a rhombus-shaped green diamond in the middle of his forehead. He had 2 slanted eyes with a sharp and penetrating gaze. An aura of calmness and solemnity surrounded him as he sat on the sofa and stared at Gustav and Miss Amy, who was currently descending. He looked around the age of 60, but Gustav knew this man couldn't be less than the age of 100 years with his level of strength. It was quite normal to live up to the age of 200 and beyond, so long as you are a powerful mixed blood. His military-like uniform was crystalline and silver in color, with royal blue stars plastered on his left chest area. The others had also heard when the AI announced the arrival of the Great Commander, so they also moved towards the main living room. They had tense looks as they arrived there, and noticed Great Commander Cheyenne sitting on the sofa comfortably. So, this is a legendary Great Commander? They all had thoughts similar to this. Youngsters, please find a place to sit. We don't have all day. Great Commander Cheyenne voiced out as he noticed that Falco, Angie, and EE were still standing at different corners. After hearing that, they had embarrassed expressions on their faces as they found a spot to sit. They all avoided the chair he was sitting on and moved to other sofas in the living room. Gustav and Miss Amy also finished climbing down the stairs and found a place to sit. Gustav sat down opposite Commander Cheyenne and secretly scrutinized him. He could sense the energy radiating from this man was not ordinary and also very powerful. On other planets, this man would be on the level of a planet conqueror. The system suddenly spoke in his mind. What's a planet conqueror? I mean, does it have something to do with conquering planets? Or it's just a term for powerful figures? Gustav asked internally. Both. With the information I have, powerful figures such as himself would be capable of taking an entire planet on and successfully conquer them. Even in lots of galaxies, there aren't a lot of them on this level. The system explained. Oh, I see. And the Earth happens to have multiple mixed bloods on this level. This must be why the Earth has successfully conquered some planets. Gustav was reminded of the imprisoned Vindruelas. But how do you know this if your memory is incomplete? Gustav asked the system. My incomplete memories doesn't affect my knowledge of the universe. This was the system's last response to him before Great Commander Cheyenne began speaking. I have witnessed your performances during the test phases and noticed the massive potential dwelling within each and every one of you present here, Great Commander Cheyenne voiced out. The research team did not do a great job of surveying the ruins properly. They were unable to notice the danger that would have caused a massive death if not for you five. We deeply appreciate the effort you five put into stopping the threat. Commander Cheyenne said with a solemn voice filled with genuine gratitude. Sire, why am I among? I shouldn't be here, Glade voiced out with a conflicted look. She kept hearing Great Commander Cheyenne say 5 of you, which meant he was referring to just 5 of them being the heroes who saved the day. This made it obvious that she wasn't included since she didn't remember being of any help. Well, get to that. Commander Cheyenne replied. First off, we will like for you to keep this blunder a secret, he added with squinted eyes. The 5 of them stared at each other in silence and a look of contemplation after hearing that. In a few seconds, they nodded in response. All this time, Gustav never took his eyes off Great Commander Cheyenne, who assumed Gustav also agreed to keep it a secret. Good. Secondly, for your meritorious deeds, we have rewards for you all, Grand Commander Cheyenne added. The first is you all are now special class cadets, he revealed. Wow, are you for real? E couldn't help but voice out. Great Commander Cheyenne nodded in response with a light smile on his face. Yes, E jumped up in delight while Angie, Maltida, and Falco had looks of excitement on their faces. Only Glade looked a bit sulky since she didn't understand why she was also receiving such privilege. The second reward is that you all are going to be given the opportunity to pick up any supportive weaponry or gadget of your choice from the base arsenal store, Great Commander Cheyenne added. They all became more excited as they heard that and looked forward to enjoying the privileges of being in a special class. Excuse me, Great Commander, but I already passed the special class test. Gustav, who was silent all this time, finally spoke. Doesn't that mean the first reward is irrelevant for me? He added with a calm look. Great he and Great Commander Cheyenne exchanged eye contact at this point, and Gustav didn't even flinch in the slightest. He truly is just as I expected him to be. A smile appeared on Great Commander Cheyenne's face as he said internally, You are correct. Great Commander Cheyenne agreed with Gustav. Chapter 285. E was confused at this point, wondering how Gustav was already a special class but still participated in the test. The rest understood, since they witnessed it themselves. Which is why we have prepared a special reward for you, Great Commander Cheyenne added. Oh, Gustav voiced out with an intrigued look. Gustav Crimson, you have been granted the rank of a Kaiser, and your training years in the MBO camp have been shortened to 2 years. You will join one of the cadet squads as vice captain and go on low-ranked missions from time to time after your first 6 months of training. You are also entitled to the privileges of a special class, and more, Great Commander Cheyenne listed out. When he was done, everyone except Miss Amy and Gustav himself had their eyes and mouth slightly open in surprise. Although they were surprised, they felt this was an appropriate reward for Gustav, since he was the one who actually battled the Vindruella. I refuse, Gustav voiced out with a look of disagreement. The entire place was plagued with silence once again after hearing Gustav's statement. This time their eyes widened more than before as they stared at Gustav with a shocked expression, wondering what he was thinking. The rewards are not promising enough, Gustav waved with a dismissive expression as he leaned against the chair. Miss Amy smiled internally as she heard Gustav speak. She hadn't said a word yet because she wasn't involved in the topic. She was only here as a witness and secretly to protect Gustav just in case. What else would you want then? Even Great Commander Cheyenne was surprised, but he acted cool and asked, I want a favor added to that list, Gustav said, while crossing his leg. I haven't agreed to keep the Kaskia Ruins incident a secret. I nearly lost my life there, along with many others. I also managed to end the existence of 2 dangerous creatures, one of which already killed countless others. This isn't enough, Gustav explained. I want you to owe me a favor that I can cash out on in the future, Gustav added. Great Commander Cheyenne stared at Gustav with an expression of interest. This lad is quite the daring one. Even though he has Amy behind him, trying to negotiate with a great commander while using the incident as a kind of leverage is really rash. The confidence he carries is a little too much for his age, Great Commander Cheyenne thought. He was really intrigued by Gustav's personality. Angie and Evie, along with the others, were about to tell Gustav not to be too rash and just accept the initial proposal, but before they could open their mouths, Commander Cheyenne responded. Okay, I agree, he said with a light smile. They all voiced out with confusion once again. He agreed just like that. They had expected a different response. Still, Great Commander Cheyenne just agreed to Gustav like that. So long as it is within my power, whatever favor you ask of will be granted by me, he added. Gustav smirked and nodded. Then we have a deal. Gustav was glad it worked out like he wanted. With this, he would have another assurance, but he decided he would only make use of that favor when he really needed it. Great Commander Cheyenne said a few more things, including information on the MBO training camp, before coming to a conclusion. Now, I shall take my leave. Glade, come with me, Great Commander Cheyenne voiced out before standing up to leave. Glade stood to her feet and followed Commander Cheyenne. Amy, Commander Cheyenne voiced out while turning around to stare at her. Your grandfather sends his greetings. He'll be arriving on Earth in a few days, he voiced out before walking out the door with Glade. Miss Amy frowned upon hearing that and kept staring at the door even after Great Commander Cheyenne had left. The whole place was filled with excitement due to the rewards. While Gustav was intrigued about what he heard last, Miss Amy's grandfather. Who is he? Gustav turned to stare at Miss Amy after hearing that. Miss Amy, Gustav voiced out as he noticed her frown and her eyes that were still glued to the door. Miss Amy heard him and responded by standing to her feet. Let's go somewhere. There's something I want to show you, she said while walking towards the door. Gustav followed Miss Amy to a part of the barricaded environment surrounding the mansion. It was a small storehouse beside the hangar area where aircraft were kept. SSHHHSSHHH. The place opened up, and Miss Amy led Gustav past the bunch of mechanisms and gadgets arranged all across the place. They got to the end of the room, and what Gustav saw in his line of sight was a large greenish rock. It was so massive that it even reached the ceiling of the room. It glowed up the instant Gustav was 9 feet away from it. This is exactly why I came here. I didn't even know that such a situation would happen during the final phase. Good thing I decided to come, Miss Amy said. I don't understand. Gustav was saying when a system notification appeared in his line of sight. His eyes widened slightly as he read through it. So, Gustav, tell me, what is your relationship with this rock? And why do I keep sensing your presence when I'm around it? Miss Amy asked while staring at the rock. If she was looking at Gustav, she would have noticed his weird expression. Instead, her eyes were focused on the rock after noticing its glow, as well as sensing Gustav's presence increasing even more than before. I got this from that asshole young Joe, and I know it must be something phenomenal. However, he has not been able to figure out its secret, and had even conducted numerous experiments trying to crack it open. Miss Amy paused her speech when she noticed Gustav moving closer to it. What are you doing? Miss Amy asked, but Gustav didn't respond. Gustav walked till the rock was right in front of him and placed his hand on it. Tryon! The rock instantly lit up like a star, shining a blinding light across the vicinity. Chapter 286. Gustav walked till the rock was right in front of him and placed his hand on it. Tryon! The rock instantly lit up like a star, shining a blinding light across the vicinity. Miss Amy shut her eyes for an instant due to the suddenly blinding green light that spread across their surroundings. From above the base, it could be seen that the mansion was glowing immensely due to the brightness. Beep, 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 beep. Alarms went off all across the base as every mechanical equipment in the vicinity shut down for a few seconds. Everyone in the base looked towards the source of the bright green light that pierced into the sky like a giant spear. So in a few seconds, it died down and disappeared. Still, it had already raised an alarm. So officials were headed towards the mansion with speed. They were all equipped with one weapon or the other, and the moment the light died down completely, 7 officials dashed into the storage room. They noticed Miss Amy standing in front, staring at them with a cold look. What do you want? She asked. Young Miss, we noticed. Before the one in front could complete his sentence, Miss Amy interrupted. Get out. I'm busy. This order wasn't repeated. The moment Miss Amy said this, every single one of them filed out. Those who were on their way here were stopped by those that Miss Amy sent out of the place. Once they knew Miss Amy was responsible, they didn't bother trying to investigate it. After they had all left, Miss Amy turned around to stare at Gustav, who was standing in front with his palms still placed on the rock. KRYYCCHHH. Suddenly, cracks started to appear, all from Gustav's palm position to the other parts of the rock. Miss Amy was shocked by this occurrence once again. She knew just how many times young Joe had performed lots of experiments trying to split open the rock, but right before her eyes, Gustav only placed his hand on the rock for it to crack open. Blam! The rock burst apart into fragments, and a small dark red, firefly-like glow could be seen floating above the spot where the rock formerly was. It flew to Gustav's face and floated around him. Not again, Gustav voiced out before opening his mouth. Fum! The glow flew straight into his mouth, causing Gustav to display a slightly disgusted look. Gustav's eyes glowed crimson for a few seconds after that before he returned back to normal. He stared at the fragments of green rock scattered across the place with a look of astonishment. Now, it's your turn to explain some things to me, Miss Amy voiced out from behind. Gustav smiled wryly as he turned around to face Miss Amy. But Miss Amy hasn't completed her narration earlier, Gustav reminded. The both of them stared at each other for a bit before Miss Amy broke the silence. We have to leave here first. grab your things. We're going back to Plankton City, Miss Amy said before turning around. Gustav, too, started walking forward, but then he remembered something and turned back around. He stared at the rock fragments on the ground and squatted. Zing, 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 zing. He placed every single one of them into his storage device before heading out. Did you finish the merge? Gustav asked internally as he arrived within the room. He slept in. Merge is complete. I am currently retrieving my full set of memories. The system replied Gustav. Gustav nodded in response with a look of contemplation. He quickly moved into the mansion and started preparing to leave. Angie, Maltida, Glade, and Falco also prepared themselves to leave and be with their family for the next 2 weeks before they would return here. In about an hour, everyone was set to leave. A private aircraft had been prepared for them to leave, and everyone boarded it, including Miss Amy. E was the only one who lived in a different city among them, so he had to join the aircraft that was returning the participants from his city. While they were on the flight back home, Gustav sat by himself with a contemplative expression, who knew that Miss Amy would be the one to find your other self, and she got it from the man, young Joe, Gustav thought. Back in the storage room, Gustav had received a notification from the system the moment he closed in on the stone. Fragment of the system found. Host is required to make contact with the rock to commence system merge. When Gustav first saw these notifications, he was confused at first, but he remembered the system mentioning that it had to sacrifice a part of itself to save up energy to get to this galaxy. Gustav only thought it shut down that part of itself or absorbed it to gain more energy. He didn't know that the system actually meant that it disengaged a part of itself. The system explained to him that this part of itself was also lost in space and probably drifted aimlessly. Since it wasn't active, it must have landed on this planet by coincidence. How the rock covered it up was unknown. However, it had helped hide the signature energy of the system, which was why it could not locate its other half. However, it also helped because sensors would have been able to pick it up the moment it was exposed without a host, since it wasn't functional. Gustav, what was that light? Angie asked from the side of the aircraft. Miss Amy was showing me a technique and ended up using too much power, Gustav answered instantly with a dismissive expression. Angie stared at Miss Amy from her seating position with a look of understanding. She totally bought what Gustav said after finding out that Miss Amy was a part of the MBO. What are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? Angie asked again with an inquisitive look. Nothing much. Just pack my items and get ready to move out, I guess, Gustav replied without much thought. Oh, okay. Would you? Angie muttered with a shy look. Would I what? Gustav asked with a look of confusion. Would you like to go out with me on one of these days? Angie asked while staring at Gustav with a shy look and reddened cheeks. Chapter 287. Would you like to go out with me on one of these days? Angie asked while staring at Gustav with a shy look and reddened cheeks. You mean like a date? Gustav asked bluntly. Angie's cheek reddened even more as she heard that. Date. Not L. She repeatedly stammered while trying to connect words together, but she was failing miserably at it. At this moment, her cheeks could be mistaken for tomatoes. All right, I agree, Gustav answered. Angie immediately stopped her jabbering after hearing that and turned her face away with speed to stare at the other side. But not this week. Next week will not be bad, Gustav added. Okay, Angie muttered in reply, even though a viable look of delight and excitement could be seen on her face. Internally, her heart was pounding so fast that she thought it would come out of her chest. He said yes. Angie turned to stare at Glade, who on the other side was giving her a thumbs up. How is it going? Gustav asked internally. Retrieval process is still ongoing, the system replied. Shouldn't you be more worried about your date? The system teased with its little girl voice turning thinner and cuter. That is the least of my concerns right now. Too many other important things to worry about, Gustav responded seriously. Ha, I forgot you were a robot. You're more of a system than I am. You will remain a virgin forever. The system responded with this and stopped talking as a whole. Gustav. This damn thing is cursing me again. About 30 minutes later, they arrived at Plankton City's International Airport. As expected, the airport was crowded with lots of people, but the spot they landed, in particular, was reserved so people could hardly be seen around there. This was where Glade, Falco, and Maltitus said their goodbyes, since their families came to pick them in this particular area from the look of things. A man with a long white horn and greenish skin came alone to pick Glade, while convoys of cars came to pick Falco and Maltito up. Both were from prestigious families in the cities, so they were treasured even more now that they had successfully gotten enlisted into the MBO. The people from each family who arrived with the convoy had plans of approaching Gustav with the intention of forming a bridge. Nonetheless, the moment they saw Miss Amy, they changed their minds and scurried away with both of them. Miss Amy already had her bike brought over, so she drove Gustav and Angie out of the airport. Gustav was once again glad to see the familiar-looking city as they traveled through the roads even. He stared at the massive buildings and the sidewalks with the teleportation circles that made trekking faster, and then the massive spatial rings in different corners of the road, with vehicles streaming in and out of them. He knew he wouldn't be staying for long in the city, so he wanted to enjoy the view this time. He never liked society, but he couldn't deny that he would miss the beautiful city. Breaking news! Breaking news! Dash, the successful candidates from the MBO entrance test have been revealed. Dash, these are the top 100 candidates from Plankton City. Dash, Gustav Crimson, the rising star tops the worldwide ranking boards. Dash, the successful candidates have arrived back in the city. Dash, we have footages of. All over the city, media outlets were all sharing similar news. Some skyscrapers displayed footage of some events that went down during the test phase, and also the included performances of the first 100 that managed to get enlisted. Gustav was mostly being mentioned because not only did he get the highest number of points among the top 100, but he was also the highest among all the candidates that passed in the entire world. He had become a hot topic, not only in the city but also in other civilized parts of the world. Big families were having meetings at the moment to think of a way of forming a bond with him. If not for Miss Amy driving extremely fast, ready to hit anyone that tried to stand in her way, Gustav and Angie would have been detained in the airport by reporters who had gotten tipped at the time of arrival. In a few minutes, they arrived in front of Gustav's apartment where Angie's parents were already waiting for them. Her parents' eyes turned teary the moment they saw their daughter and went to hug her. When she got down from Miss Amy's hover bike, the entire neighborhood had come out of their houses to welcome them, and everywhere erupted with excitement. Miss Amy didn't stay long. She left after telling Gustav what time they were going to meet the next day. Gustav could not get away from all the greetings and chatting for the next 1 hour, since everyone was excited to see the star of the entrance test. Girls in the neighborhood were all on him, trying to get in his good graces. Even their parents were pushing them more. They had no idea that Gustav only saw them as nuisances, no matter how beautiful they were. Angie also didn't stay put in one place. Whenever any girl was trying to hit on Gustav, she would appear. After 2 hours had gone by, Gustav finally got the chance to leave the ongoing neighborhood celebration. He arrived in front of his apartment. So, this is how these popular celebrity figures feel? Gustav sighed as he noticed everything that was placed in front of his door. Pink letters with lipsticks along with flowers of different kinds could be seen in front of his door. Good thing the MBO camp is very far from here. Gustav thanked the stars that he would be leaving the city 2 weeks from now. He couldn't imagine having to live like this. SSHHH. He opened his door and walked into his apartment. It was only 2 weeks, but it felt like he had been away for longer. The dust particles that settled on different spots of the living room also made it look like that. Memories successfully recovered. The moment Gustav was about to start cleaning, he noticed this notification in his line of sight. Chapter 288. Memories successfully recovered. The moment Gustav was about to start cleaning, he noticed this notification in his line of sight. Gustav proceeded to sit somewhere and speak to the system. "You've recovered them?" Gustav asked as he sat on the sofa that was currently covered with a cloth. "Yes, all my memories have been recovered," the system replied, "as well as all my computerized data of the universe and my full energy," the system added. Gustav's eyes squinted as he responded. "So, where did you come from?" he asked. Before Gustav could reply, a system notification appeared in his line of sight. Initiating inner space creation, Gustav's line of sight suddenly turned whitish as his eyes glowed crimson. His mind was pulled into another place, and he found himself in a wide hall. The hall was immensely large and wide. The beginning and the end could not be seen, but there seemed to be spots that had different kinds of things placed around. Far behind, Gustav could see pillars of different sizes, but these pillars weren't really pillars. They were actually rectangular in shape and transparent. Some reddish liquid was stored within these pillars. Every pillar had pints of these reddish liquids stored in a lined-up format. To the left, Gustav could see things like shelves lined up in rows and columns. These shelves had scroll-like objects placed within them. He looked forward and started walking towards the massive reddish crystal floating in midair. A short girl with a unicorn-like horn in the middle of her forehead, sporting long pinkish hair, could be seen walking towards him from up ahead. She was clad in a long, whitish, glowing gown. The gown was so long that it swept across the floors as she walked forward. She looked to be around 12 years of age with her small stature, but her eyes looked extremely sharp as she gazed at Gustav. Gustav stopped in front of her and asked, "Where did you bring me?" He asked with a look of astonishment as he looked around him. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, obviously a virtual representation of the system. "Am not that dumb," Gustav answered with a dismissive look. "What makes you think this is virtual?" The system asked with a slightly repressed look as she moved closer to Gustav. Gustav was at least 2 heads taller than her, so she had to look up to stare at his face. "What part of all this screams reality?" Gustav said while making gestures at the insurmountable number of pillars, shelves, and reddish crystal floating in midair. The system pouted and swung out her left foot towards Gustav's right leg. Bam! "Ow!" Gustav exclaimed with a slight look of pain as he stared at her. "Why did you do that?" He proceeded to ask with a tone of annoyance. "Oh, so you felt it. Do you still think this is just virtual?" she asked. Gustav left eyebrows raised slightly as he stared at her. "You're in my personal space that also contains my core. I have recovered all my energy, so I can draw your mind here anytime we want to have a personal conversation," the system stated. "So, do you mind telling me everything now?" Gustav asked. "No," the system replied bluntly. "What? Why?" Gustav exclaimed with a look of dissatisfaction. "My installed protocols prevent me from disclosing some information," the system replied. "It'll only tell you what I can. For the rest, it'll reveal them through quests," the system added. Gustav's face shone understanding as he heard that and asked, "So how about revealing what you can firstly?" 2 chairs appeared behind both of them, and the system gestured for Gustav to sit. "I am a computerized digital creature that was created with the purpose of containing the secrets of the universe and something else. Anything more than that, I can't say," the system voiced out. "But you haven't said anything," Gustav said with a weird look. "All I can add is there isn't much time left, so you have to become strong very fast for what is to come. I will issue you 2 quests tomorrow. These quests have to be completed within the time frame required, and it will give you an idea of the direction that will lead to the predestined path," the system said with a profound look. "Sigh, All these, and you still haven't said anything. Gustav shook his head as he sighed. You will have to be patient. With time, everything will be revealed, the system said. One thing I can say for sure now is you should prepare yourself to leave Earth in a few years, the system added. For that to happen, you'll need to be in a squad within the MBO that gets sent on intergalactic missions. Gustav said with a contemplative expression. You should start working towards that, the system voiced out before. Gustav's line of sight turned white as his mind was pulled out of the space. Gustav found himself staring at his room again. His eyes were squinted as he dwelled on the system's words. Instead of revealing everything, it only made me more intrigued. I wasn't even able to ask about what it was looking for. Gustav sighed with a slightly disappointed look. Gustav remembered the expression on the system's face as it spoke to him earlier. That already is a sign that whatever mission it was onto is something dangerous on a very serious level, Gustav thought as he stood up with a serious look on his face. Whatever it is, I will make my decision when I cross that bridge, he thought as he started cleaning up his apartment. Gustav spent about 2 hours making sure everywhere was clean. When he was done, it was night already. I hope those guys have been working hard, Gustav voiced as he went to take a shower. After he was done, he clothed himself and stepped out of his apartment. The instant Gustav arrived downstairs, he could see 2 buff men waiting for him in front. Boss. Both of them shouted out at the same time as they approached Gustav with a respectful look. Chapter 289. 6 weeks ago, breaking news. We have received degrading footage concerning the disciplinary staff of the biggest school in Plankton City, Echelon Academy. From an anonymous source, this footage happens to display the students being sexually assaulted along with other forms of assault and verbal abuse. Viewers' discretion advised. Another footage includes the confession to a conspiracy involving these same disciplinary staff. According to the information we received, the school's kitchen that caused the death of 5 was orchestrated by them. The Koyan family have threatened to destroy the school after seeing their beloved third daughter being assaulted on the footage. The Echelon Academy is currently undergoing intense investigation. The 4 high school disciplinary teachers have been carted away by the police. Other forces are oppressing the police force to relinquish these 4 to them. Gustav, who was currently on his way back home, stared at the news displayed on different city screens. Several news stations were currently reporting the current incidents, and Echelon Academy happened to be the hottest topic on the news at the moment. Gustav smiled as he watched the 4 disciplinary teachers being dragged away like criminals. Due to the current situation, the school had been shut down in the meantime, so the students were urged to return back home. The school shutdown was why Gustav was heading back home at the moment. Even though it was still morning, he had successfully framed each and every one of the 4 disciplinary committee members and sent footages to the media concerning this. Miss Amy assisted him in this aspect. She gave him the contact of a media personality and helped them meet. Not only were they framed for these crimes in school, but he also added the confession of Ebunalua to it. He wanted to put them in a sticky situation first before adding the issue of the kitchen fire, so their reputation would have already taken a blow. Then, when the kitchen fire situation is added, their credibility when they try to defend themselves would be at an all-time low. Again, an expected scenario was where Maltita's family threatened to shut down the entire school because she was involved. Other big families also came out to say they were going to withdraw their kids from Echelon Academy after seeing proof of what went down. Of course, the 4 had tried denying all the accusations, but then the footage had been inspected properly, and no signs of unoriginality were found. In other words, these 4 were already doomed. The police force brought in Eben as well for questioning and had him make the confession again. The disciplinary teachers tried to deny never meeting him, but then phone calls were retrieved. The police had technology that could also retrieve months-old conversations on the phone between parties. They made use of this, and everything was uncovered. The whole situation turned messy as the four were unable to deny any of the crimes they were confronted with anymore, even the one they were framed with. Gustav arrived home later and waited for the verdict of these four along with Eben. He finally got a holographic TV to watch the news. The next morning he had a smile on his face as he watched the five of them being carted away in prisoners' outfits. I bet this isn't how it's going to end, Gustav said internally as he saw them being taken away in convoys. Afterwards, the media called out Echelon Academy for firing and smearing the reputation of Boss Danzo. This had proven that he was innocent and framed. The media had tried to find out the disciplinary committee's reason for doing this. Still, they were only informed that Boss Danzo refused one of their requests, and it ended up that way. This way, Boss Danzo had regained his reputation. Gustav quickly made use of the contact Boss Danzo had given him to call. In a few seconds, the call was picked. "Hey, son." Boss Danzo's merry voice was heard from the other end. Gustav hadn't heard Boss Danzo's voice for roughly a month, so he felt relieved now that he had finally solved the issue. He wanted to make sure the situation was resolved before contacting him. "Boss Danzo, have you seen the latest news in Plankton City?" Gustav proceeded to ask. What's happening?" Boss Danzo asked with an intrigued tone. He was no longer in Plankton City, so he had no idea about things that went down there. "Check for news on Plankton City," Gustav stated. Boss Danzo would have to tune into a worldwide news station to figure out what was happening. "Oh, my name has been cleared?" Boss Danzo voiced out from the other end with a tone of disbelief. Gustav smiled as he heard Boss Danzo speak. "How did this? Don't tell me you did something?" Boss Danzo asked. "Doesn't matter. What matters is now you can come back," Gustav replied with a wider smile. I'm very glad about this. It's good, really good news, and much appreciated, my boy." Boss Danzo didn't ask how he did it because he knew Gustav was tight-lipped. "But I hope you didn't suffer any troubles while trying to clear my name. Also, are you fine?" Boss Danzo asked, if with a worried tone. No, I'm perfectly okay," Gustav voiced out as he recalled the beating he dished out to Ebionalua. He should worry more about those involved, Gustav said internally. He knew Boss Danzo wasn't the violent type, so he tried solving this in the most non-violent way possible. Ebionalua's torture session was absolutely necessary. However, if something happened afterwards, he wouldn't be involved anymore. "So, when are you coming back?" Gustav proceeded to ask. "About that, I will not be coming back anytime soon, my boy," Boss Danzo replied with a slightly saddened tone. "Oh, why?" Gustav asked with a low tone as his excitement slowly died down. "I'm currently dealing with something over here. It will take some time before I am done, but don't worry, one of these days we'll see each other again," Boss Danzo voiced out heartily. Gustav felt a little down hearing that, but he responded with okay. Chapter 290. I heard about the upcoming entrance test phase. I'm sure you're working towards it. Boss Danzo and Gustav continued on the call for about 20 minutes, catching up on different things before they ended the call. Boss Danzo reminded Gustav to keep watch of his granddaughter once he got into the MBO training camp before the call ended. Gustav laid on his bed with a smile on his face. Although Boss Danzo wouldn't be returning yet, he was glad that he had solved the situation. Maltida really let me do that for the sake of being my partner in the MBO. I need to give her the benefit of the doubt because no other girl would be willing to do that, Gustav thought, as he stood up and proceeded to go complete his tasks for the day. In her household, Matilda sat close to the window side and stared out through the window. "I hope he acknowledges my sacrifice for him," she said internally while placing her hand on her left chest area with a look on her face. "I've pulled some strings behind the scenes to make sure those four get more punishment." The next day, after performing his daily tasks, Gustav tuned into the news. Another breaking news was being displayed. After the disciplinary teachers and Eben were given a sentence, they were to be transported to a maximum security prison on various charges. While on the way, the vehicles carrying them were hijacked by unknown assailants, and they were all abducted. These unknown assailants laid waste to the squad transporting them and smoothly completed the abduction operation. Everyone already suspected that this must be the doing of one of the big families who didn't want them to get off with just imprisonment. Surprisingly, Maltita's family threatened the police to make sure they found those assailants. This made people question if they were truly the ones that abducted them or not. Gustav already concluded that they had to be the ones. He felt the threat was just a way to cover up their tracks and reduce the suspicion people would feel towards them. Now, they will suffer a fate worse than death. Gustav smiled as he thought. He knew just how brutal these big families were when it comes to handling situations that affected their image or any one of their members. He knew that he would have found himself in this same situation had it been proven that he was the cause for Hung Ja's current predicament. Gustav sighed in relief as he moved to his reading chair to check some things on his holographic computer. It's time I started making plans on how to handle the situation of the neighborhood after my departure, Gustav said internally as he started checking things on the internet. Underscore side story. 2. A week went by in a flash, and during this time, the whole incident had died down. The disciplinary committee members were nowhere to be found even after the police force had searched far and wide. Echelon Academy later reopened after giving a formal apology to everyone involved, especially Boss Danzo and Maltita. All the staffs of Echelon Academy were to undergo reevaluation according to the government to be sure that the others were in their right minds. Of course, Miss Amy excluded herself, and no one was able to do anything about that. From that day onwards, the teachers minded the way they interacted with the students, and cameras were now placed in the offices to monitor their activities. The mixed bloods that used to be discriminated against due to low bloodlines were no longer on the receiving end of bullying like before. Even when it happened, the teachers will interfere since they were being monitored 24/7. They wanted to make sure they looked responsible at all times for fear of losing their jobs. At this time, only 3 weeks were left before the start of the much-anticipated MBO entrance exams. Gustav had already thought of a way to handle the problem of his absence. He decided to make a kind of night guard agency that will specialize in keeping the neighborhood safe while he was away. The money would be generated from the people living in the neighborhood, and from there, he would pay his workers. At this point in time, he was searching for mixed blood recruits that had reached the serial rank to work for him. Gustav knew it was impossible to find youngsters at this level, so he knew only fully grown mixed bloods that could no longer increase their ranks would be interested. Gustav used the internet to place ads on different sites and waited for feedback. While this was ongoing, Gustav didn't neglect his training with Miss Amy, neither did he stop infiltrating the border. On this particular day, Gustav had successfully gotten all his stats beyond 50 points. He got an exponential increase in strength overall the moment he got to this point. Gustav infiltrated the border again and decided to visit one of the places he hadn't checked out yet. After traversing through some parts of the dense forest area, he came across a sloppy area that extended upward with small stones packed together in a bunch placed on different parts. These small stones had green bushes surrounding them. Gustav found it a little weird because not only were these stones packed together in a bunch all around the place, but there was also no vegetation beside the green bushes surrounding the stones for the next 2 miles. This area was void of trees and plain grass, and it kept extending upwards. Gustav walked in the midst of these stones and even activated God Eyes to check them out. Still, he noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Gustav kept walking through their midst for several minutes, checking some of them out while skipping the rest. So, there's nothing here, Gustav said internally as he arrived at the top of the slope and could still see nothing besides these bunch of stones scattered all across the place. Gustav was about to go back and head towards another place in the border when he thought of something. I haven't seen a single mixed breed around here. Neither could I find one around the route that led here on my way to this place. As he came to this realization, he thought, that means this is the territory of a powerful one. How does the map not have a red dot here? He had discovered this a bit too late, because just as he wanted to leave, the ground started to vibrate. Chapter 291. He had discovered this a bit too late, because just as he wanted to leave, the ground started vibrating. Ha! Gustav exclaimed, as he noticed the ground started to split open in different places. Sprint has been activated. Gustav activated Sprint, and dashed towards the forest area about 3,000 feet away. He noticed that the ground was not only vibrating, but it also elevated, so he wasn't interested in staying around to see what would happen next, because instinctively he knew it was definitely going to be something he couldn't handle. Gustav was right by running in the opposite direction because at this moment his senses warned him of immense danger. As he dashed across the place, dodging the pile of stones placed on the ground in different spots, the ground behind him was splitting up in lines like they were chasing after him. The moment he was close to reaching the forest of trees up ahead, the head of a massive creature burst forth from underneath the ground. The creature's head was rhombus-like in shape, whitish in color, with one massive eyeball in the middle of its head, and another massive eyeball underneath its large mouth that happened to be in the middle of both eyes. Its head was full of weird, wriggling, whisker-like things that protruded out of its skin. As it shot out of the ground, the weird stones that were in a bunch around the place could be seen glued to its massive body that was like that of a snake. Its body skin was gray in color, and those bunch of stones were not actual stones. Instead, they were a part of its skin. The tip of these bunch of stone-like things opened up, and fumes of green gases oozed out of it. The creature was so massive that it would only need a single lunge to arrive before Gustav. Gustav only turned around to stare at it for an instant. In that instant, he scrutinized the creature's features and turned back around to run at full speed. I can't win against that, Gustav said internally as he activated combination. Sprint plus dash swoosh. An air streak was cut across the place as Gustav's body dashed through the forest of tall trees with immense speed. The creature stared in the direction of the forest as it noticed dust forming a long trail. Its two massive black eyes squinted as it opened its massive mouth that was in between. Swai. The creature, who had obviously noticed Gustav, delved downwards towards his position. Grai. Trees were uprooted from the ground as its head smashed into them while they moved. In almost an instant, it arrived behind Gustav, who had already gotten quite a distance away earlier. Luckily, Gustav had already predicted this, so he was already descending. Vroo! Gustav's body descended, causing the creature to miss him as its body kept extending forward and was only a few centimeters above Gustav. Gustav noticed one of the pointy bunches of the stone-like objects on the creature's body slashing towards him from ahead. The creature was still moving forward due to missing Gustav, but this stone-like object was heading towards Gustav, who was lying on the ground with immense speed. Grab! Gustav reached out and grabbed the rock as it arrived before him. Swisush! He was lifted into the air, along with the large, snake-like creature who started turning its snaky body around after missing Gustav. Gustav was lifted far into the air as the creature straightened its body to stare at the forest region again. A trail of destruction had already been left in its wake. From above, it could be seen that lots of trees had been separated from the ground, leaving a lot of space within the forest. The creature noticed Gustav holding onto its body through one of those bunch of pointy-like stones. Fum! Green fumes of smoke shot out of the holes at the tip of the stone-like things on its body. The entire forest was suddenly covered in green smoke. Gustav hadn't expected this. The moment the smoke was shot out, it covered his entire body and forcefully penetrated his nostrils. Toxin immunity has been overridden. Host body functions has been paralyzed. Gustav lost control of his body as the smoke infiltrated every nook and cranny of his insides. He tried holding on, but he couldn't. His fingers slipped from the stone-like objects, and he fell. His body descended from the sky at fast speed with no signs of movement. Swayaya. The snake-like creature twirled its body around with fast speed and dashed towards Gustav's descending body with its mouth wide open. Just as Gustav's body was only a few inches from being gobbled up, a red flash of light suddenly appeared out of thin air above Gustav. The light formed a pair of red wings as a man putting on a mask emerged from it and grabbed Gustav, who was still falling through the air. He pulled Gustav into the light, and they disappeared together. Paralysis will wear off in 10 seconds. Gustav saw this notification the instant his sight cleared up. He noticed he was now in another part of the borders with a masked man. The masked man was about 7 feet tall, clad in a long black cloak that covered the upper part of his body completely. His boots were also black in color. His entire frame was dark, and he looked quite menacing. Even the glow that surrounded him was a dark red one. "So, you finally revealed yourself," Gustav voiced out while still lying on the ground. The man squatted in front of Gustav and stared at him. "You must have inhaled that gas, which means you'll be paralyzed for the next 12 hours. Are you not even scared of what I might do to you?" he said with a husky and low tone. "Nah. You have been watching since. If you wanted to do something to me, you'd have done that already," Gustav replied without a tone of worry. "You are one weird kid, they'll say," the man proceeded to ask before standing back up. "So, what did you want? Why have you been watching me? Who are you?" Gustav asked in quick successions while standing to his feet. "What? You've regained control of your body already?" the man asked with a tone of surprise. Chapter 292. So, what did you want? Why have you been watching me? Who are you? Gustav asked in quick successions while standing to his feet. "You've regained control of your body already?" the man asked with a tone of surprise. Gustav shrugged off his surprised exclamations and asked again, "Who are you?" "I should be asking the same question, kiddo." His eyes suddenly turned fierce. "You shouldn't be here. Someone on your level of strength should not be able to get into this place," he voiced out suspiciously. Gustav stared back at him. "That mask already proves that you also shouldn't be here. This means you want your existence to remain unknown. But as for me, I don't really care, because the situation can be handled even if someone figured me out." "So, who are you?" Gustav asked without a hint of fear written on his face. "So, this is the thanks I get for saving you," the man voiced out as he turned around. "I do appreciate your assistance, but I don't like being watched. Certainly, you have a motive for being here, as do I," Gustav replied. "Are you not in the least bit scared that my motive for being here is evil and disastrous?" the masked man asked again. "It wouldn't really matter to me unless it clashed with my motives. But if you truly were having evil intentions, then why save me?" Gustav voiced out. "Out of interest, I may be intrigued." "There can be so many reasons for that," the masked man replied. "That's a load of bullshit right there. Anyways, are you going to answer me? Or what?" Gustav asked with a solemn tone. A low sigh escaped from the masked man's mouth as he walked towards the tree up ahead and leaned his back against it. "All right, kiddo, I will mention a few things to you, and afterwards I expect you to give me a response too," the masked man voiced out. The masked man proceeded to tell Gustav that he had been on a mission within the border for the past 1 month. He mentioned that he was tasked with observing something by a mercenary organization. "There is a device that I am meant to locate that was lost within the borders of your city," he concluded with this. A device? Gustav voiced out with a contemplative expression. A small explosion occurred within an aircraft that was passing over here some time ago, and that device happened to fall out of it. Its last known location was within the borders, he explained. What does it look like? Gustav asked. Tap. Troyan, the masked man, tapped his left sleeve area, and a holographic projection of a cylindrical-shaped item appeared above his arm. This cylindrically shaped item looked similar to old age batteries, but it was yellowish at the top and had a pyramid-shaped head. So what does that have to do with why you have been watching me? Gustav asked. I initially thought you were sent by an opposing organization, since according to the client, he wouldn't be the only one looking for the device. He said if others caught wind of it, they will also arrive here searching for it, and clashes would happen. He explained. After watching you for some time, I realized that your only purpose of coming here was to murder the mixed breeds and take their power, he added while observing Gustav's expression. Yes, I know about your multiple abilities. I have seen you use them, he voiced out with a tone of astonishment. I still wonder how a person like you exists. Making use of different abilities, he said with bafflement. What do you intend on doing with that information? Who else knows? Gustav asked. He didn't look worried, as one would expect. This was because Gustav was aware that the man must have been watching, so there was no way he'd hide his abilities and risk ending up getting killed by the mixed breeds he was battling. If I were to have told anyone, you wouldn't have a moment of peace. The world will come for you knowing that there's a kid that can take the abilities of others and use them as his. Not only are you a threat, but you could also be a weapon if they figured out your secret, the masked man stated. For some reason, you don't seem to want this. Gustav had read the way the man spoke and figured that he wasn't after all that. Yes, I don't, because I have something else in mind, but first off, tell me why you always come here. I don't think it's just to kill the low-level mixed breeds, the masked man asked. I don't know if you have noticed that mixed breeds go beyond the border, into the territory of living humans on the other side, Gustav asked. I did notice you battling one the other time. Are you saying it's not normal that they wander beyond the border? The masked man asked. Gustav nodded slightly in response. I have been tasked with finding the reason for that. They are not supposed to be able to go beyond the border. And whenever they do, they disrupt the lives of the humans living in the neighborhood on the other end. It is my job to prevent that, Gustav explained. The masked man's eyes now had a gaze of understanding after hearing that. How about this? Let's help each other. I noticed that you have a map of this place. I am missing one. We could divide the places searched. You'll go to the less dangerous places while I'll visit the dangerous ones. Time is of the essence, so I have to find this device as soon as possible. And you also need to find whatever is causing this problem. After the masked man finished speaking, he stretched out his hand for a handshake. Well, I have nothing to lose, Gustav said internally as he stretched out his hand to receive the handshake. For now, that was how they both collaborated to investigate the situation within the border. Gustav shared the map with the masked man, and the masked man shared the holographic projection of the device. Chapter 293. Gustav shared the map with the masked man, and the masked man shared the holographic projection of the device. From that day, they started working together to investigate the border. They shared communication devices, so when something happened, they'd be able to inform each other. At the end of the day, they'd compile observations. Gustav didn't inform Miss Amy about this collaboration. Instead, he investigated the mercenary agency the masked man was sent from himself. The agency was called Cloud Beaks, and they were pretty popular in the southern Lantern City, which was on another continent. This broadened Gustav's horizons, as he was able to figure out that there were also private agencies that dealt with the situation of mixed bloods and mixed breeds apart from the MBO. These agencies were mostly sought out by those who could not contact the MBO for their issues and those who had illegal issues to deal with. Gustav also figured out that it wasn't only through the MBO that a person could leave the planet. There were other means, too, involving these private agencies. In the next 3 days, they were starting to make progress on Gustav's part, but not so much on the masked man's side of the investigation. Gustav was able to trace residual energy that caused the opening of one side of the border, which gave another mixed breed the opportunity to escape. Gustav asked the masked man to deal with the mixed breed that was given a chance to escape while he traced the energy. The problem was the energy disappeared without a trace before he was able to pinpoint the exact location. However, he was able to pinpoint a part of the border that the energy came from. This part was where he had to investigate to find out what exactly was causing these occurrences. Gustav investigated that particular environment for almost an entire day and found nothing out of the ordinary. It was only a small forest area with a pointy mountain in between. The mountain wasn't very tall, but it was very pointy and couldn't be climbed due to that. The trees in the area surrounded it like they were guarding it. Even the masked man had to show up and assist him in the investigation since he didn't make any progress, but he also didn't find anything out of the ordinary. "I just have to wait till it opens up the border again," Gustav said internally as he sat beside the pointy rock. "Another part of the border has been opened again," the masked man voiced out the instant Gustav sat down. "What? I didn't even sense anything," Gustav voiced out as he jumped to his feet. The border was about 700 kilometers from this area, which would still take Gustav a significant amount of time to travel. Shutura, a dark red glow, appeared around the masked man as he grabbed hold of Gustav and leaped up. They immediately found themselves several hundred meters in the air, dashing towards the border with immense speed in midair. In a few seconds, they were closing in on the border in the air, and Gustav could already see 12 feet large, greenish-looking scorpion going through a hole that had been created within the border. God eyes have been activated. Gustav immediately activated God eyes and stared at that part of the border. His line of sight suddenly changed color as living things around him turned purple and red. I can see it," Gustav voiced out as he noticed some blue line streaks retracting at fast speed away from the border. These stakes were moving underground, which was why the masked man couldn't see it. He stared at Gustav's green and scarlet glowing eyes and understood that he was using one of his powers to see something that he couldn't. "It's moving very fast. I won't be able to chase after it with my current speed," Gustav voiced out as he watched the energy move at a very fast speed. Normally, the masked man would go after the mixed breed. So Gustav would chase the energy and see where it's headed before all traces of it were erased again. However, the problem was Gustav wouldn't be able to give a proper chase. "Are you ready?" the masked man asked. "Ready for what?" Gustav responded with a confused tone, but there was no response. The masked man used his left hand to shoot out red streams of energy which formed a long line ahead. At this point, their momentum was coming to an end, and they were already descending from the air. The masked man held Gustav with both hands and flung him towards the line he conjured in midair. Gustav's body ascended once again, while that of the masked man descended. The instant Gustav's body made contact with the red line, his body pulled the red line backwards for about a second, like it was made of rubber before he was catapulted forward with intense speed. Vergian, swing. Gustav's body was propelled forward by the red line, which later disappeared from midair after sending him forward. The masked man had gone after the mixed breed that escaped through the opening at this moment. At the same time, Gustav kept his eyes on the ground to watch the streaks of energy as his body traveled across the air. His body flying through the air was keeping up with the speed at which the energy was retracting, but he hadn't thought about how he was going to land. In a few more seconds, they arrived back at the suspected area again, and the streaks of energy slowed down a bit as it moved underneath the ground in between the roots of the trees. Gustav's body was already descending at this point, but the stake of energy was still moving fast towards the east side of the large, pointy mountain in between. Swaya! Gustav activated enlargement and grabbed hold of the branch of a tree as he descended. The branch of the tree snapped in half due to his fast descending speed, but Gustav was able to land without causing himself any form of injury after breaking the fall. Swoosh! He dashed forward with immense speed after combining both dash and sprint to chase after the residual energy. However, in a few seconds of moving, the energy disappeared once again without any trace. SHHHSSHH. Gustav paused his movement as he arrived on the east side of the pointy rock, where trees could be seen everywhere. Gustav stared forward. This time, "I will get you," he stated as he moved forward. He stopped in front of a lineup of 6 trees and started circling around them. Although Gustav was unable to compete with the speed of retraction, he still used God eyes to zoom in his sight, so he was able to see where the residual energy had disappeared without a trace, and that just happened to be beneath the ground around where these 6 trees were located. "You need to get over here." Gustav touched the small button on the side of his ear as he spoke. A blasting sound rang in Gustav's ears before he got a response. "I'm on my way." Chapter 294. You need to get over here. Gustav touched the small button on the side of his ear as he spoke. A blasting sound rang in Gustav's ears before he got a response. "I'm on my way." As the line got cut off, Gustav decided to check out the area while waiting for the masked man to arrive. God Eyes was still activated, so he looked around the area, checking out the ground and the trees, but he couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. The trees were just trees, and the ground had nothing like an energy source hidden under, since that was what was being displayed to him by God Eyes. Thum! A loud, wind-slashing sound reverberated across the area, causing Gustav to stare upwards. From the northeastern side, a red line could be seen moving across the sky at net-breaking speed. Wind blew across the place as the red line descended towards Gustav's position. Bam! The masked man landed in front of Gustav, causing the wind to blow his hair backwards a bit. "Over here, this area is where the traces of those streaks of energy disappeared," Gustav said while walking around the 6 trees and making gestures towards them. The masked man also observed the area just like Gustav, and after a few seconds he spoke. "I don't sense anything, Eth." "Oh, wait, I think I sense something now." His eyes squinted as he moved around the 6 trees. "It's very faint, barely noticeable, and it reduces by the second." The masked man could tell that if he wasn't this close to the trees, he wouldn't even be able to sense anything. They had also investigated this area yesterday, but couldn't find anything. So he guessed this must be because the energy just retracted. So it left extremely faint traces that would disintegrate completely in a few seconds. "Move away," the masked man said to Gustav as he stood between the 3rd and 4th tree. Gustav did as he was told and distanced himself from the area a bit. The dark red energy covering the masked man suddenly surged intensely, dyeing the entire vicinity with a shade of dark red. A massive surge of red waves suddenly burst forth from his figure. Bang, 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 bang. 4 trees in the surroundings were instantly blasted apart, causing the space around him to get cleared. However, the waves were still bursting forth from his body towards the surroundings. Gustav had to further distance himself from the area. Just as the waves were about to slam into the 5th tree, a silver-colored barrier suddenly appeared around it, protecting it from the waves. Bang, 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 bang. The waves kept causing the destruction of more trees in the surroundings before they disappeared. Around the masked man was an almost empty space within the forest of trees. A radius of over 700 feet was cleared of trees and vegetation, except for a single tree standing in the midst of this newfound wilderness. The masked man and Gustav moved forward and stood in front and behind this tree that looked no different from the ones obliterated earlier. Whatever is causing the border disturbance must be disguising as this tree, Gustav said as he stretched out his hand to touch the tree. His hand wasn't repressed by any force like he expected. It seems that whatever caused this will prevent any harm from befalling this tree. If one approaches with no nefarious intentions, it won't prevent contact, Gustav figured as he tried punching the tree, but got blocked by a barrier that suddenly appeared between his fist and the tree. How do I uproot this? There's no way I can let it remain here, since it's the source of the border's disturbance, Gustav muttered with a look of contemplation. Atomic disintegration? Gustav thought as he contemplated on the amount of energy that would be spent to disintegrate enough atoms that the barrier contains for him to phase through. No, I will spend too much energy and end up being weakened. Let me try this instead. Gustav stretched out his hand to touch the tree. What are you doing? The masked man asked with a look of suspicion. He was also trying to reach for the tree, but he was being prevented. I want to try something, Gustav said as he suddenly clenched the tree tightly, causing his fingers to dig into the surface of its barks. Gustav had disguised his intentions and causing the tree not to put up its defenses when he reached out for it. At the moment, he was pulling the tree with as much strength as he could muster, with his fingers digging even more into the tree. The masked man was surprised because even he could not make contact with the tree even when he also tried disguising his intentions like Gustav. What he didn't know was Gustav's ability to shapeshift had played a huge role in this. He moved over to help Gustav, but just as he arrived behind him, the tree blasted out silver-like energy, causing Gustav to be blown backwards. Bam! Gustav slammed into the masked man, who grabbed hold of him and slid back by a few inches. Don't worry, I'll handle it, he said while letting Gustav down. I thought you couldn't break through it earlier, Gustav said while turning to the side to stare at the masked man. I was only probing it earlier. Now that we've pinpointed the exact one, it won't be a problem to knock it down, the masked man replied, while stretching out his right hand. Shuririn, boom! A massive wave of red energy shot out of his arm towards the tree. Truin, the barrier appeared again, protecting the tree from the blast. However, the massive energy blast was still being shot out in waves. Gustav watched with a look of astonishment as cracks began to appear around the barrier. KKRRYYCCHH. I never really pondered on it, but this person happens to be more powerful than I thought, Gustav said internally as he watched the barrier get completely obliterated in a few seconds. Bang! The red waves slammed into the tree, causing it to be blasted aside. The masked man finally stopped shooting out these waves after destroying the tree. SHHHSSHHH. Dust and wood debris swam across the air for a few seconds, reducing the visuality of the environment. When all these settled, a large object could be seen in the former position of the tree. The masked man and Gustav's eyes widened a bit as they stared at the object in front. Chapter 295. When all the debris settled, a large object could be seen in the former position of the tree. The masked man and Gustav's eyes widened a bit as they stared at the object in front. It was about 3 feet in length, cylindrically shaped with a pyramid-shaped tip and yellowish frame. Gustav and the masked man moved closer to observe it at a closer angle. Isn't this the device you were searching for? Gustav muttered as they closed in on it. It is. Looks like it got activated while being here. But I wasn't given any information about it being capable of doing any of these, the masked man said as he squatted slightly and placed his hand on the device. Some silver snake-like electric arcs were still moving across the body, but they had no effect on the masked man, even when he placed his hand on it. Something doesn't add up, Gustav said internally before asking, How long did you say this has been missing? It's been over 3 months, the masked man replied. Not up to a year or longer? Gustav asked. According to the client who issued the mission, it hasn't been that long, the masked man replied before pulling the device from the ground. The neighborhood has been experiencing this situation for a way longer period than the device has been lost. So, how is it responsible for the opening of the border? Gustav wondered with a contemplative expression. Hey, come see this, the masked man called for Gustav while staring at the hole created on the ground from blasting the tree away. The hole wasn't very visible before, but after the masked man moved the device, rays of sunlight penetrated it, making the space underneath visible. Gustav moved a few feet forward and squatted on the other side of the hole. What is that? Gustav asked with a confounded expression. They could see a metallic-looking stage-like object underneath the ground. It had steps on all sides, and it extended beyond how far they could see underneath the ground. In its middle, there was a pointed red pole. Just what is that thing? Gustav wondered out loud. It was structured in a way that didn't make sense to him, so he had no idea what he was looking at. Whatever that thing is, it must have been drawing power from the device which is used in opening the border at specific times, the masked man voiced out. Gustav also figured that this must have been the case. Either way, this means our call-up. Before the masked man could complete his sentence, he suddenly sensed something and squinted his eyes. He suddenly grabbed hold of Gustav in one hand and the device in the other as he jumped backwards. Boom! A loud explosion resounded at their previous position as smoke and fire spread across the place. Luckily, Gustav and the masked man were able to escape the explosion as they found themselves several hundred feet behind their initial position. They were still even sliding backwards due to the masked man's immense speed. As expected of the Red Shadow, not only did you manage to dodge my surprise attack, but you also protected the kid and the merchandise. Your reputation truly precedes you. A loud feminine voice could be heard coming from within the explosion. A feminine stature in a black combat uniform and brown helmet walked out of the flames like it was nothing. But you're right where I want you, she voiced out next. Before the masked man could wrap his head around that, a yellowish streak the size of a thumb shot through his left arm from behind. Splurt! Plop! His entire left arm was severed from his shoulder, causing the device to fall along with it. Gustav's eyes widened as he saw blood splatter across the place. I couldn't even sense it. Neither could I sense her presence before she appeared. Ugh! The masked man voiced out in pain as he let go of Gustav and used his right hand to grab hold of his left shoulder. A trap. She was here from the start, and I was unable to sense her. His eyes turned fierce as he stared at the feminine stature approaching. Vamp, which, he muttered. Thank you for getting the T-67 device for me. They'll be taking that off your hands now. Oops, my bad. You only have a single hand now, she voiced out while stylishly walking forward without a care in the world. The masked man quickly grabbed hold of the device with his right hand as he stood upright with speed. Blood was still oozing out of his severed arm like a fountain, but he totally ignored it. Run! He shouted out as he turned around with Gustav as his right leg tapped on the ground, creating a red light in the form of a pair of red wings up front. However, before Gustav could move 2 feet forward, she arrived in front of him with an outstretched hand. I know you still have some fight in you even with just a single arm, and I don't want to go through the trouble, so we'll just hold this kid a hostage instead, she voiced out as she reached to grab Gustav. Too fast, it would be impossible to dodge, Gustav said internally but still tried to dodge. Size manipulation has been activated. Gustav suddenly shrank in size and became half of his original height, causing him to easily dodge her arm and keep running forward. The feminine figure was surprised for an instant, but she quickly regained her composure and went after Gustav again. The masked man had arrived in front of the red pair of wings, but when he noticed the feminine figure closing in on Gustav, he threw the device into the light within the pair of wings and dashed backwards. Whoosh! He arrived in front of the feminine figure and grabbed hold of Gustav before jumping backwards, but the feminine figure did not give up pursuit this time. For an instant, "Go!" he shouted out as he threw Gustav into the light within the pair of wings. Bam! Before the masked man could go in, she slammed into him, sending him tumbling towards the side. Bang! 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 He slammed into several trees, toppling them in the process. The feminine figure had already dashed towards the pair of wings, but before she could arrive in front, "Truinen, it disappeared. Where did you send them?" she asked with a condescending tone as she dashed towards the masked man. Fwum! She instantly arrived before him, and a battle started. Truinen, Gustav found himself outside the border after being thrown into the light and landed before a massive tree. Chapter 296. Gustav found himself outside the border after being thrown into the light and landed before a massive tree. A small cut had appeared on his forehead, and blood was oozing down his nostrils. Gustav jumped to his feet and looked around him. He noticed he was back in the sparse forest behind the neighborhood. The border was thousands of meters behind him. He quickly grabbed the device and started running in the opposite direction of the border. "Miss Amy, I need your help." Gustav quickly got in touch with Miss Amy through a call while running towards the neighborhood area. In several minutes, Miss Amy arrived before Gustav, who hid in a particular area close to the neighborhood area. Gustav narrated the current predicament in a few seconds, and Miss Amy got a small gist of the situation. They went through the border to look for the masked man, known as the Red Shadow. Miss Amy took Gustav along with her. She didn't think he would be a bother because she was confident in dealing with the situation even with his presence. Unfortunately, even though they searched far and wide across the border, they couldn't find Red Shadow and the one known as Vamp Witch. There were obvious signs of battle in the place Gustav and Red Shadow found the device, but both their presences were nowhere to be found within the border. Trees were snapped in half and uprooted. Massive craters and crumbled highlands showed visible signs of battle. Yet no presence of mixed bloods could be found. Miss Amy searched the other side of the border also, but it ended up making no difference. Even after rounding up the place for hours, it was still the same result. Miss Amy and Gustav settled at the location of the battle and checked out the device. Miss Amy scrutinized the device properly. "I can't say I know what this thing is precisely, but it does look like a key," Miss Amy said to Gustav as she held onto the 3-feet-long cylindrical-shaped devices. "A key to what?" Gustav asked. "No idea. But it seems pretty powerful to have been powering up whatever was responsible for the opening of the border," Miss Amy said as she walked towards the hole created from blasting away the tree, disguising the device earlier. She squatted in front of it and stared at the unknown platform underneath the ground. Just what is this thing?" Miss Amy muttered underneath her breath. She dropped the device in her hand to the ground and started making some calls. "Doesn't this mean I've solved the neighborhood issue?" Gustav said internally. He would have been celebrating this since it was good news, but he was bothered about the fact that the Red Shadow might have sacrificed his life for this. He felt no one or nothing was worth sacrificing life over, especially not in this shitty world. "I shouldn't jump to conclusions. If I ever see him again, it'll repay today's favor," Gustav said internally. Miss Amy called in a squad, who proceeded to take the device away with the purpose of investigation. Some part of the squad stayed behind to dig open the ground and reveal what was underneath. Miss Amy later returned Gustav back home and promised to give him feedback on the situation, as well as updates about Red Shadow if she figured anything out later. The days went by in a flash, and Miss Amy gave Gustav some information. The structure found underneath the ground was a kind of machine that had run out of power some months back. It was the cause of the border opening up at specific times, but when it ran out of power, the T-67 device fell to that area by coincidence and ended up powering the device back up again. Miss Amy said they hadn't still discovered how the machine got there or the purpose of the T-67 device, but they were still investigating. Also, there was still no information on the Red Shadow. It wasn't until a week later that Miss Amy finally discovered the location of the Red Shadow agent. He was found to be alive, but in a crippling condition. Gustav figured it was because of the battle, but it was said that he would be okay in a bit. So Gustav later stopped worrying. After the Red Shadow recovery, the whole situation was no longer in Gustav's hands. It was now the Red Shadow and Miss Amy's business, i.e., how they would handle the T-67 device. Gustav decided to focus on his own situation. He had gotten feedbacks from the ads he placed on the internet about a job, but then the neighborhood situation had been solved. Mixed breeds would no longer appear in the neighborhood. So Gustav had to think of a new purpose for the agency he was going to create. The labs and restaurants still need the flesh of mixed breeds, and there are still lots of them within the border. A smile appeared on Gustav's face as a new idea came to his mind. Gustav thought of creating a hunting agency first off. I only need to get weapons and some drugs for safety assurance since I already have the means to get through the border, Gustav thought. He still had the map that marked out dangerous spots within the border. Nevertheless, he remembered that some dangerous places might not be marked out, just like how he had encountered that massive serpentine mixed breed. Gustav decided to task himself with marking out such dangerous and unknown spots himself with the help of Miss Amy before creating the agency. The border was massive, and at least 50,000 mixed breeds lived within. So Gustav doubted that they would run out of mixed breeds to hunt. The next weeks before the start of the MBO entrance test were spent training, and preparations were made for the starting of this hunting agency. Gustav decided to name it the Crimson Hunting Agency. This was the first place he inputted the money he had been gathering all this time. End of side story 2. Chapter 297. Months back, the neighboring cities in Plankton City had a school exchange event. After it ended, all schools returned back to their cities. Echelon Academy happened to be among the schools along with Black Rock schools. They returned together since they happened to be from the same city. Unfortunately, the journey was not going to be as smooth as they had thought. It was still early, around 8 in the morning, when they finally got to the outskirts of Atrahia City, which happened to be where the event was hosted. On the route they took, a sudden explosion suddenly happened in front, causing road devastation. The vehicles transporting the students had to stop midway, seeing the destruction happening in front. It was an unexpected and unbelievable sight of destruction. The route they were supposed to take had been destroyed, but that wasn't a problem since the vehicles floated above the air. However, the increase in the temperature from the explosion was no small thing. There were no fireworks like seen in the movies or footage. This was happening right in front of them, and immediately panic erupted. A convoy of about 16 military-like vehicles as well as aircraft moved over. The military-like vehicles surrounded the 4 school hover buses transporting the students. Figures dressed in red combat wear and masks stepped out of the vehicles armed with advanced weaponry. "Step out of the vehicles," one of them shouted out as they pointed these weapons at the vehicles. The teachers within the hover buses were shocked. It was obvious these weren't military personnel. Neither did they look like they were here for the purpose of performing good deeds. Ruckus! Chatter! Ruckus! Ruckus! Everyone stay in. Drive R. Make sure the doors remain locked. Whoever these men are, they won't shoot at you kids. The teacher within the bus, Gustav, was boarding voiced out to calm the panic within the vehicle. Doesn't seem that way to me. Gustav observed the line of these figures as he thought. Just like here, in other vehicles, the teachers were trying to calm the minds of the students while also telling the drivers to make sure the doors were tightly locked. Amongst the figures pointing their weapons at the vehicle, a bald, bulky man with a long scar extending from his left cheek to his neck as he walked forward. He was the only one among the figures that didn't use a helmet. The rest had their faces covered, and they were even some that were still in the vehicles. Step out of the vehicles, or my men will open fire, he voiced out as he stood in the middle of the 4 hover buses. Stay in. There's no need to fear. They dare not open fire. The authorities must be on their way now, the teachers assured the students within, but in the next moment. Fire! The bald man shouted out bang, 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 bang. The figures immediately opened fire and started bombarding the 4 vehicles with intense shots. Red and purple beams were shot out repeatedly, causing the hover buses to vibrate intensely. The teachers and the students within panicked. Luckily, the buses were built with a strong protective covering that prevented the fire of these weapons from penetrating. All the teachers within the buses were mixed bloods. However, they weren't very powerful, so they felt it would be foolish for them to go against this unknown gang that they had no idea about. The bombardment went on for some seconds, but when the bald man noticed that they were starting to spend too much time, he finally decided to act. He raised both his arms upwards, and his body started glowing a bright blue light. SSS. Dark clouds began to gather from above. Trahayik, a big lightning bolt descended from above and landed on his figure. SSHRRKKYYHH. His entire frame was now coated in lightning arcs. The students watched with astonished looks as he clasped his palms together, causing for big circular lightning orbs to appear around him. He sent those lightning orbs out, and they went ahead to float above the 4 hover buses, 1 each. Brief. These lightning orbs discharged a kind of blast of electricity on the buses, causing their entire frame to be consumed by electric arcs. SSHHHHSSSSHH. In the next moment, the doors of the hover buses opened up of their own accord. The drivers were unable to close them up because they had lost control. Get them out, the bald man commanded, and all the figures ran forward towards the buses. In a few seconds, the students and the teachers were rounded up by the gang. They had been brought out by force, and the teachers refrained from trying to go against them in fear that they might harm the students. What do you want? One of the teachers asked. We have what we want already. You future problems are coming with us. The bald man voiced out as he beckoned for the aircraft to land. This aircraft was big enough to contain them all, even though they were up to 200 in number. We're not going anywhere with you, one of the students shouted out. Yeah, we ain't going anywhere with you lots, another one also voiced out. Dash, there's only around 50 of them. Dash, yeah, we can take them. Dash, let's do this. Dash, yeah. The entire place erupted in chaos in an instant as the first person who voiced out caused the rest to also wake up. Zwoosh, zwoosh. In an instant, attacks were flying in every direction as the students dashed forward to engage the gang. Bang, bang, boom, bam. As the place erupted in chaos, the teachers also had no choice but to act and decided to attack the bald man, who seemed like the boss. Unfortunately, it all ended in about a minute. The students, regardless of their massive numbers, were struck down fiercely by the gang. These figures were already well trained in combat, so all the attacks from the students seemed like child's play to them. Only a few of them were knocked down, but they still managed to keep the situation under control. Bang! A student was shot in the chest, and a huge hole appeared where his heart used to be. Gasp! This action shook everyone, and the students' confidence was shattered. These made it easier for them to be beaten and rounded up. The MBO later arrived, since this was a situation regarding mixed bloods. However, the students and the teachers had been taken as their hostage, so they were unable to get close to the site since they didn't want to rile them up. Why is he naked? The bald man said, while pointing at one of his men that were also taken down during the assault. This particular one had already been burnt beyond recognition. However, what baffled them was the fact that he was naked. The bald man suddenly sensed something and turned around, but it was too late. Boom, 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 boom. 12 of those military-like vehicles suddenly exploded. The entire vicinity was suddenly dyed in bright red fire, causing everyone to be dumbfounded as they wondered what was happening. Chapter 298. The entire vicinity was suddenly dyed in bright red fire, causing everyone to be dumbfounded as they wondered what was happening. What's going on? The bald man voiced out with a surprised look. The whole place became disoriented in an instant. Some of the gang members in these vehicles that just exploded had been blasted to smithereens due to having no idea that this was about to happen. The bald man looked around with a suspicious gaze. Little did he know that this wasn't the end. Boom, 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 boom. The rest of the convoy vehicles exploded one after the other, leaving no working land vehicle on scene. The only vehicle left now was the aircraft, which was very incapable of transporting everyone, the gang included. Fortunately for the gang, some of them caught wind of the situation early and left the convoy vehicles before the last explosion. So, there was still many of the gang members left. Find whoever is responsible, the bald man shouted out as he looked around with a dark face. He could already tell that this wasn't the work of the MBO or any authority because they wouldn't risk the lives of the kids just to blow up their vehicles. He felt they were probably dealing with someone who didn't give a damn and just wanted to cripple their transportation access, which he saw as a disadvantage since he couldn't use any of the students' life to threaten the person to back down. The armed gang moved out and looked around the place for any suspicious figure. Those with bloodlines related to Vision made use of them, but even after searching for minutes, they couldn't find who was responsible for this situation. The teachers and students wondered who was responsible for this. Just like the gang, they were clueless except for a few of them. Where's Gustav? Angie and Maltida wondered as they looked around the place, observing the faces of the students one after the other. They had been searching for him since they came out of the hover buses, but hadn't spotted him once since that time. Sweat was already forming on Angie's forehead as she hoped that the thoughts coming to her mind at this moment weren't true. However, she couldn't help but think about the possibility, since she knew just how daring Gustav is. The gang leader already suspected that there might be someone disguising among them, so he ordered for everyone to open up their helmets so he could see their faces, but even after doing that, there was nothing amiss. The gang members wore their helmets back and proceeded to keep looking for the culprit. One of the gang members with a helmet on his head also approached the leader from behind. "Chief, come see this," he said with an urgent tone. He had a rather raspy voice. The bald man quickly followed behind him towards the northeastern side of the vicinity. A small hole could be seen in the ground. "What am I looking at?" the bald man asked. "Don't you see it, Chief?" "You have to move closer," the gang member with a raspy voice proposed. The bald man moved closer just as the gang member proposed. However, just as he did, the gang member came up behind him. Swayai! A syringe filled with purplish liquid appeared in his hand, and he stabbed it forward at a fast speed towards the neck of the bald man. It was extremely fast. However, just as it was only a few inches away from penetrating his neck, the bald man suddenly turned around and grabbed the gang member's hand. His eyes had a hint of cruelty as he stared at the gang member in front of him. "So you're the one responsible," he said with a solemn tone as he squeezed the wrist of the gang member tightly. Bone-popping sounds began to ring out as he slowly raised the gang member's hand up while squeezing. HNNGGH. Muffled sounds of pain could be heard from underneath the helmet as the gang member tried freeing himself from the bald's man grip, but it was proving difficult. He threw out his left fist towards the bald's man face. However, the bald man caught his fist with ease and started twisting his arm towards the side. The bald man separated both the gang member's arms and raised his leg. Bam! He landed a kick right in the chest area of the gang member, sending him flying backwards. His chest caved in as bone-cracking sounds rang out before he landed on the ground and slid backwards for a few feet. SHHHSSHH. Chief, chief, chief. Tap, tap, tap. The gang members behind came running and surrounding the gang member that tried revolting in the blink of an eye. About 15 of them pointed their weapons at the gang member, while 3 lifted him up forcefully before placing him on his knees before the bald man. The bald man was currently in possession of the syringe filled with purplish liquid. He held it up and scrutinized it with a suspicious gaze before walking towards the gang member on his knees. Pa! He slapped the helmet off the gang member's head, revealing the face of a young, handsome teenage boy with dirty blonde hair. Blood was oozing from his nostrils and mouth. However, he didn't have even a slight expression of pain on his face as he stared into the eyes of the bald man with an unbothered expression. This person was obviously Gustav. "We have a fierce one here," the bald man voiced out as he squatted before Gustav and placed his finger on the blood oozing down Gustav's face. He used his finger to brush up a little speck of Gustav's blood and put it in his mouth. This action shocked the students as they saw his action. Only the rest of the gang members weren't surprised. Seems full of energy and vitality, the bald man muttered with a tone of delight. "What was that for?" Gustav voiced out with a look of repression. "Our chief likes to taste the blood of his victims before their death." One of them voiced out with a loud tone. Chapter 299. At the position where the students and teachers were being rounded up, they were squinting their eyes to see who was being held, but it was proving difficult for them due to the gang members surrounding his frame. Angie and Maltida had caught a glimpse of the person's stature, which looked familiar to them, but they hadn't seen his face yet, so they hadn't confirmed their suspicion due to that. However, with each passing moment, Angie got more and more worried after noticing that Gustav was still nowhere to be found. "Isn't that one of yours?" One of the teachers from Black Rock schools, who was also on his knees, said to an Echelon Academy teacher while staring in the position of Gustav and the gang. Everyone's eyes widened slightly as they heard that and stared at that location with looks of worry and confoundment. Back in the position where Gustav was being held down by the gang members, the bald man pressed on the top of the syringe twice, causing the purplish liquid to jet out a little stream. "Let's see if your fearless and lively look will remain after I give you a dose of your own medicine," the bald man voiced out as he moved closer to Gustav. Gustav tried pulling himself from the hold of these gang members, but he wasn't as strong as they were. The bald man moved the needle towards Gustav's neck with the intention of injecting him with the liquid within the syringe. This was when the teachers started screaming out for the gang to release their students, and even started throwing out threats of what the MBO would do to them if they hurt him. While that was ongoing, someone suddenly dashed out from the encirclement with fast speed. Swoosh! "Let him go!" A feminine voice was heard as a silver streak cut across the place and arrived at the position of Gustav and the gang members in a matter of moments. Swee! Bam! It was almost like one of them had predicted this and slammed the butt of his weapon onto the side of the head of the speedster. She was surprised and unable to dodge on time because it arrived at her blind spot. Angie was knocked down without being able to do a thing. Gustav stared at her unconscious body on the ground and turned back to stare at the bald man. "You are already dead." Gustav's eyes at this moment were brimming with murderous intent. "Oh, what is this I sense?" the bald man asked with a taunting look as he paused his administration of the syringe. "You're deaf," Gustav responded with a fierce look. "Oh, is she your girlfriend?" the bald man voiced out, causing the entire place to be filled with laughter. Gustav didn't respond and just kept giving them fierce stares. "I just got a new idea. How about I try it on her instead?" The bald man stood to his feet and moved towards Angie after saying that. Gustav's eyes immediately turned super murderous as he forcefully tried pulling himself from the grip of those holding him to stand up. They had a tough time holding him in place due to this. Grrhh. Gustav groaned as his canines turned into long fangs and his eyes glowed red. Oh, he's triggered, the bald man said with a tone of delight. All the more reason to make her the specimen for receiving what you wanted to administer to me, the bald man said, and squatted. This bastard. I might have to risk exposing all my abilities now, Gustav said internally as he slowly started morphing. He had thought the bald man would inject him with the syringe, which wouldn't be a problem since he had toxin immunity. However, he didn't expect Angie to come into the play. This syringe had a poisonous venom which he extracted from the Savrinia serpent mixed breed he fought weeks back. Gustav had cut off the tail and done the necessary experiment. He always kept the syringe in his storage device, so he decided to use it now against the bald man, since he knew he wasn't strong enough to take him on, which was why he wanted to fool him earlier. Angie would melt from the inside out if she was injected with that toxin, which was why Gustav was feeling very worked up at the moment. The bald man brought the needle to her neck and pricked it a little. At the moment, Gustav was about to unleash all of his abilities when, swee, a massive metallic upside-down bowl-like structure descended from above. Bam! It landed on the position of the encircled students and teachers, covering them up entirely within. The gang members around them were left standing outside of the massive structure that fell from the sky. It was as if it had been created with precise calculations because it covered up only the students and the teachers without the gang members surrounding them. The teachers and students found themselves inside this dark place. However, before they could react in an alarming manner, a bright light appeared within, illuminating the entire place. They stared at the figures in combat uniform with a look of relief. On the outside of the structure, the gang and their leader had looks of surprise on their faces as they stared at the giant structure covering up their hostages. Is the MBO stupid to think I will not sacrifice these kids? The bald man shouted out as he stood to his feet with a look of anguish. He walked over to Angie, raised his foot above her face, and gestured for his gang to fire up their weapons. You were already dead the moment you laid hands on my student. A sharp feminine voice resounded in the ears of the gang, the boss included. The bald man forehead creased as he turned to the side and noticed a beautiful-looking lady with ash-colored hair standing only 2 feet away from his right. How did you get here? He voiced out with a look of confusion along with the rest of his gang. You had better not come any closer. Movement from you, and they both die. The bald man was already sweating at this point. He knew this lady was no ordinary person for her to appear beside them without alerting them. At his level of strength, he felt this should be impossible unless the gap in strength was massive. The female, who was obviously Miss Amy, stared at the gang coldly. You should be begging for your lives now, but you still have the guts to threaten me with my kid, she voiced out with a condescending tone. Hey, bitch, better know your place. One of the gang members pointing a weapon at Gustav voiced out, while firing it up even more. Gustav smiled. Didn't I say you guys were already dead? He voiced out while staring at Miss Amy. Disable the limiter for 2 seconds. Miss Amy commanded, no one in particular. The rest stared at her with looks of confusion, but in the next moment, a loud blast resounded across the place. Boom! The entire place quaked with such intensity that even people in the city behind felt the buildings they were in vibrate. Splash! Splash! Flyish! Plop! Plop! Ah! The bald man's eyes widened with a look of fear, confusion, and disbelief as he looked around him. All his gang members were no longer on the ground. Instead, their body parts, along with their blood, was raining from the sky. Arms, legs, heads, eyeballs, thighs, and different body parts rained from the sky along with blood in multiple droplets. The bald man was already dyed in the blood of his gang members as he stared at their scattered bodies all across the place. A huge crater had already been formed due to the blast that happened a moment ago, but for unknown reasons, he was unaffected. He seemed out with a horrified look as he moved back. Gustav and Angie were no longer in the vicinity. Only Miss Amy was standing there, cleaning her blood-soaked hands with a napkin. Wherever the napkin came from was unknown, along with how her clothes and body, except for her hands, were without bloodstains was also a mystery. The remaining part of the gang behind that surrounded the massive structure that fell from the sky were already shivering slightly in fear as they stared at the gory scene up ahead. They could see the heads and eyes of their comrades sprawled all over the floor, and their chief, who was currently bathing in blood, falling from the sky. "Do you still want a bargain?" Miss Amy asked with an aloof expression as she threw the napkin to the side and walked towards the bald man. The bald man shrank back in fear as he saw her approaching. "Your biggest mistake was harming him," she voiced out as she grabbed hold of his head. 2 hours later, the scene had been crowded by operatives of different kinds, and the students were being tended to. The gang, or whatever was left of them, were being transported away in an aircraft. The whole situation still seemed unreal to the students. They had never expected that they would be attacked on their way back from this event and nearly abducted. They were glad that the MBO was able to show up. Nobody besides Gustav and other MBO agents in hiding witnessed the decimation, so they had no idea that Miss Amy was mostly responsible for their safety. When investigations were made, they found out that the gang was a part of a terrorist group that needed fresh recruits. Their plan was to abduct these mixed blood students and brainwash them before training them to become a part of their force in the future. Fortunately, things had worked out well due to Gustav contacting Miss Amy the moment they were surrounded. The gang didn't expect that someone this powerful would be deployed by the MBO, and this was truly normal thinking since someone as powerful as Miss Amy wouldn't be seen in the field. Unfortunately for them, Miss Amy shared an attachment with Gustav, which ended up ruining all their plans. The students were later returned back to their homes with well-equipped MBO squads, escorting them for the purpose of security. End of side story 3. Read the author's note below. Chapter 300. Boss. Both of them shouted out at the same time as they approached Gustav with a respectful look. Gustav stared at these two men with a solemn attitude. "How has it been going?" Gustav asked. "Fine, boss," they both voiced out together. The one on the left had an Alpic-shaped face with a stout build. His black hair looked rough and unkempt. However, his overall look was a little fearsome. The other one had a large build and green dots all over his face and other exposed body parts. "Braun, Dirk, I suppose you have reports for me," Gustav stated, and they both nodded in response. "Good. Let's go discuss at the coffee shop," Gustav proposed. They headed towards the coffee shop within the neighborhood to discuss. Within a room-sized shop across the street that leads to the bus station, several tables and chairs arranged in columns could be seen, along with a counter on the far left end. The voices of people chattering away within the room while sipping on drinks in mugs and cups could be heard. On the third seating area towards the right, a group of 3 could be seen sitting around a table. A young lad and 2 fearsome-looking men. They all had coffee in front of them as they discussed. "Boss, we successfully captured 22 of the Kumbesa turkey mix breeds," the man with an Alpic-shaped face, sitting on the front left side of the young lad, voiced out. "We have kept them in the storage facility, and just as you ordered. A butcher has been arranged," the other man with green dots all over his face said. The man with the Alpic-shaped face was Braun, while the one with green dots all over his body was Dirk. Gustav had hired these 2 men 3 weeks before the start of the MBO entrance test, and he gave them specific details of what the job would be all about. Although there were more people who had wanted to join them, Gustav decided to start with these two first. They were mixed bloods on the serial rank with zero experience in hunting. However, they used to be guards in small office places and organizations in the city. When they found out Gustav's pay was more, they decided to change ship. They were surprised when they found out that he was just a kid and wanted to bail out at first until they saw the stacks of cash. However, cash wasn't enough. They actually wanted someone who was strong enough so they wouldn't be led to their death. So, Gustav proved himself by fighting both of them together and winning. He saw potential in their combat experience as guards, which was why he hired them. They both have low-grade bloodlines, but since they were serial ranked, he knew they'd be able to handle many of the low-level mixed breeds. He was only able to defeat them due to his strength gained from having multiple bloodlines. Other mixed breed hunters had to go to the outskirts of the city and even farther to hunt down mixed breeds. On the contrary, Gustav only had to bring these two into the border with him to hunt down mixed breeds. It was easy access that everyone wasn't privileged to have. Gustav provided them with tools, and they had been hunting down mixed breeds since. When they witnessed the way he killed mixed breeds within the border, they became intrigued about his real identity, but since he never revealed anything to them, they were left to wonder about it. At the moment, they were giving Gustav a report of their hunts during his 2 weeks of absence due to the MBO entrance test. They were overwhelmed when they witnessed Gustav's performance on screens all across the city. They were glad that they were employed by someone who was currently a superstar in the city. They saw him on different billboards all across the city. At the moment, the eyes of everyone present within the shop would occasionally glance in their direction, wondering if their sight was working well due to Gustav being within. Gustav repeatedly nodded as he listened to their reports. Has Chingwan Restaurant made any requests lately? Gustav asked. Yes, they sent a list of requests to our site. I left them pending since you hadn't returned. Braun replied. Are all the items listed available in our storehouse? Gustav asked. Yes, they are, Braun replied. Next time, you don't have to wait for me to sell them. Once the items requested are available, start the delivery process at once, Gustav answered. Both of them nodded as they heard that. Looks like you'll need to get a secretary and some more workers. Having just two isn't enough, Gustav said internally. His reason for not employing more was due to not seeing anyone that met up with his requirements. Now that he knew had be gone in 2 weeks, he wanted to set everything in order before he left. He'll also need someone to supervise these guys in my absence. Miss Amy is out of the question since she'll also be leaving the city after I'm gone. Gustav felt this was another issue that needed to be solved. About 2 hours later, Gustav had gotten back home and decided to rest early so he would wake up in the middle of the night to complete his daily tasks. He and Miss Amy had already planned their time of meeting during the week, so he knew he still had some time to put some things in order, like his agency. Gustav felt this would be the best time to expand, since he was now well known across the city. However, he was still thinking of the best way possible to execute his plans, so he would achieve the best results. So, the system will be issuing out the quest tomorrow. I wonder what it will be? Gustav thought before he went to bed. He knew dwelling on it wouldn't be sensible, so he shrugged the thought off his mind and tucked in for the night. The following day, around 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, Gustav awoke to a ringing sound in his head. He opened his eyes with a slightly sleepy expression. Oh, finally! It's here, he muttered as he stared at the notification that appeared in his line of sight. 5-year quest has been issued. Chapter 301. 5-year quest has been issued. This was the first time Gustav was being woken up by a quest, so he knew it had to be serious. Gustav opened up his notification panel to check out what the quest details were all about. Quest. Located Dimension 6 in planet Humbad. Gustav stared at the panel with a look of astonishment as he read the details of the quest internally. Dimension 6 in planet Humbad, he muttered with a look of confusion. In the next instant, his eyes suddenly widened as he remembered something. Planet Humbad, the home planet of the Slarkovs. Gustav muttered after recalling this from the historical books. Why would the system be issuing me an invalid quest? The planet was destroyed long ago, which was what caused them to relocate back to Earth. How does it expect me to find this Dimension 6 within a planet that has already been destroyed? This looked extremely confusing to Gustav, so he decided to ask the system, "Hey system, why give me a quest to find somewhere that doesn't exist?" Gustav said internally. Who says it doesn't exist? The familiar cute and thin feminine voice resounded in his mind. Planet Humbad was destroyed thousands of years ago. So how do I find a place within a planet that doesn't exist anymore? Gustav asked with a slight expression of annoyance. I ask again, who says it doesn't exist anymore? The system voiced internally once again. Hey, did you forget about the part where I mentioned it was destroyed thousands of years back? According to the history books, the Slarkovs descended to Earth because they predicted the destruction of their planet, which eventually got destroyed. Gustav argued with the system, since the quest was practically impossible with these facts. You are really a Dumbo. The system insulted Gustav. Gustav. They predicted the destruction of their planet and left, but were they there to see its destruction? The system asked. Of coup. Gustav paused midway and placed his hand on his chin with a look of contemplation. What exactly are you trying to say? Gustav asked. Are you saying Planet Humbad might still be in existence? He added with a look of disbelief. Who knows? Just make sure the quest is completed. Sooner or later, you'll discover the truth if you dig deep enough, she voiced out before turning quiet. Gustav didn't bother trying to bring the system back to this topic because he knew all too well that the system would stop replying to him at this point. Could it really be possible that the planet still exists? But it was said in the history books that hundreds of years later, a research team was sent from Earth to investigate. They found nothing in the part of the galaxy where Planet Humbad used to be. Gustav couldn't wrap his head around all this. It was all too confusing, but he had decided to dig deep and do proper research about it. Due to this, Gustav had even forgotten to check the other details of the quest for the rewards, so he decided to check them now. Rewards for quest completion, plus 5A grade bloodlines unlocks, class level up, plus 100,000,000 EXP, plus 3 unique skills unlock, all abilities, evolutional upgrade, original bloodline level up. S-grade. Gustav's eyes widened slightly as he saw them. These are too good to be true. He was pleasantly surprised by the bountiful rewards. Class level up. I can't even use the power of my current class. Gustav smiled wryly as he stared at this. Hey system, one more question. Any idea on how to use this power called YRKI? Gustav asked internally. Figure it out yourself, or there's no point. The system responded. Thanks for nothing, Gustav said internally with a look of repression. Gustav went back to checking the rewards and nodding with a look of delight after reading each one of them. S-grade. Does such a bloodline actually exist? Gustav wondered as he stared at the last reward. Have you checked out the punishment? The system suddenly asked while Gustav was contemplating. Oh, yeah, you and punishments. It's probably going to be hidden like the others, right? Gustav said internally with a scoff while looking further downwards. Punishment for failure. Death. Duration. 5 years. Host will meet his end if the quest is not completed within the time frame required. Gustav's eyes widened as he noticed the punishment. What is with you and death? You try to kill me on our first encounter, and from what I remember, you once gave me a quest with punishment as death. Should I remind you that you also wouldn't survive without me? Gustav said with a tone of annoyance. I'd prefer to meet my end than to remain within a useless host. The system replied with an uncaring tone. Gustav. Besides, if you cannot complete these quests, you have no hope of taking on what is to come, which will eventually lead to death. So failure leads to death either way, the system foreshadowed again. Gustav's had a look of contemplation as he heard that. It was obvious that the system had a lot of things it was keeping from him, which caused him to worry. He didn't want to end up failing due to lack of information, but he understood that the system had built-in protocols that prevented it from sharing everything. He just hoped that just as it had put this quest out, the process of completion would cause things to be revealed to him slowly. Wait, you said quests? Gustav's mind went back to a few moments ago, where the system used plural form instead of singular. Yes. Did you assume there was only one quest? The system responded with a ridiculing tone, as if it was trying to say Gustav was too lazy. Gustav. Another 5-year quest has been issued. A new notification suddenly popped up in Gustav's line of sight. He wasted no time in requesting for the full details of the notification to be displayed. Quest, become the most powerful mixed blood on Earth. Chapter 302, Quest, become the most powerful mixed blood on Earth. Huh? Gustav totally didn't expect this, so he was a little surprised. Rewards, plus 300,000 credits. Bloodline upgrade, level up ×3, universal enlightenment, plus 2 bloodline unlocks. Punishment for failure, death, duration, 5 years. Host will meet his end if the quest is not completed within the time frame required. Good rewards, but death again? Gustav said internally with a slight frown. Even though he didn't know what universal enlightenment was supposed to entail, he knew it wouldn't be bad, just like the others. Gustav sat up with a look of contemplation as he pondered about the whole situation. He had 5 years to achieve all these, which was almost impossible from the looks of things. Channeling your bloodline to even the serial rank normally took multiple years of training, regardless of your bloodline grade. Although a higher bloodline grade meant faster channeling and easier breakthroughs. Nevertheless, becoming the most powerful mixed blood in just 5 years was an impossible feat. Miss Amy was practically the fastest growing mixed blood in history. However, she had started training from a young age, unlike Gustav, who only started less than a year ago. At Gustav's current age, Miss Amy was already going on missions and was already close to the serial rank, whereas Gustav is still at the Zulu rank. Gustav sighed as he thought of all these. The system says it would be pointless, and I would die either way, even if the death punishment was not included if I failed to complete the quest. I guess this is ride or die. I have to put my best into completing both quests, Gustav said internally with a look of determination. Although the system hadn't revealed a lot to him, he knew very well that the system was in possession of knowledge that far exceeded that of any library or person living on the face of the earth. This was why he knew the system wasn't messing around if it said he would die anyways if the quest wasn't completed in 5 years, and it allowed him to stay alive. Gustav wanted more information, which was why he kept arguing with the system, but it would seem the system honestly couldn't tell him more about what the challenge truly was. Gustav stood to his feet and went to brush his teeth. It was still around 3:30 a.m., but Gustav had decided not to go back to bed until he completed his daily tasks. His daily tasks got more difficult by the day due to his strength that also increased. However, it was not really a problem for him to complete them. It was only more time-taking. Gustav also had his own personal daily tasks he created that included his training schedule asides from that of the system. His personal tasks included combat training by himself within the border, 6 hours of bloodline channeling, reading both online and books he got from a public library, and doing more research on mixed breeds, the MBO, and powerful organizations in the world. The only issue he foresaw was completing the system's daily tasks in the MBO training camps. Although he could act like he was training even more while completing these tasks, he was worried because the daily tasks were versatile. He might be asked to complete a task where he needed an instrument that could only be found in the city. He could only hope that things wouldn't be that way. Gustav wore a black hoodie, went out of his apartment. The instant he arrived outside, he dashed in the direction of the heart of the city. Swoosh! As he sped off across the silent roads, his mind wandered off to what he had achieved in this short period, and he thought of what he might achieve in the next 5 years. Regardless, he wasn't really bothered, but he was quite curious. He was swooshing past small buildings at a breakneck speed, making use of the main road, instead of that of the pedestrians. He could already see large buildings in the distance since he had already gone past the edge of the city that looked like a rural area. The teleportation circles and spatial rings were still active on the roads even by this time. As Gustav ran further, he arrived in the more urban parts of the city and kept running. At this point, he would occasionally see 1 or 2 vehicles pass through this area. Today's daily tasks are pretty crazy. Huh? Gustav said internally as he shook his head, but he was actually excited since he has wanted to try out one of the tasks. First off, Gustav stared at the tall building he was closing in on in the distance. The building was shaped to look like a spiraling icicle, and it was on the left side of the road, amidst many other skyscrapers in this area. It was over 300 stories tall from Gustav's observation. Swoosh! Gustav sped towards it at full sprint capacity, jumping above the roadblock that arose to stop pedestrian movement due to a vehicle approaching from the other side. Thump! Gustav jumped above the truck-like vehicle and arrived in front of the building in an instant. Swoosh! Winds blew across the vicinity as Gustav took steps forward and started running on the surface of the skyscraper. Tap, 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 tap. The surface made light tapping sounds as his feet movement transported him 1,000 feet across the surface of the skyscraper in a single instant. Gustav stared at the top of the skyscraper as he kept running across its surface that was constructed in a spiraling format. Gustav had to keep running round as he ascended. It was like he was being given a chance to see the entire city in a 360 degrees format. The more he ascended, the more he was able to see the city view. In a few more seconds, he arrived at the top of the skyscraper, which had something like a small balcony there. Gustav pulled himself up and stared at the city from this point of view. What a nice view! Gustav took a few seconds to stare at the city before checking out the system notification that appeared in his line of sight. Daily task completed, 1/3 run across the surface of a 16,000 feet building. Chapter 3:03. Daily task completed. 1/3 run across the surface of a building at least 16,000 feet in height. Thump! Gustav leaped up and landed on the tip of the massive pole in the middle of the skyscraper's top. He squatted and breathed in the fresh air as he stared at the bottom of the skyscraper. He turned his face towards the left and stared at the closest skyscraper. The closest one was at least 4,000 feet away, and that one was shorter than the one he was currently standing on. This would be a bad fall, but I'm sure I can make it, Gustav said internally before rising back up and turning his body towards the left side, where the other skyscraper was located. The wind kept blowing his hair backward due to the high altitude, but never for once did his body shrink back or forward due to that. Super jump has been activated. Gustav's thighs and legs budged intensely as he activated super jump. His sports pants hugged onto his muscular legs and expanded like they wanted to tear due to the budge. Thump! Gustav leaped forward with intensity, causing the long pole extended from the top of the skyscraper to vibrate intensely. T-R-H-H-R-H-H-H. His body traveled across the air in an arc, crossing over the massive road. Thousands of feet below. Swoosh! Bang! Gustav landed on the other skyscraper after a few seconds of flying through the air. His thighs and legs went back to normal afterward, and he turned around to stare at the other skyscraper behind. Gustav smiled. Second task completed. He was glad he had made significant progress. He could now leap over 4,000 feet forward without having to make use of any form of speed. Now for the last, Gustav said internally as he moved to the edge of the skyscraper to stare at the road where a massive spatial ring could be seen. Even though the skies were dark, the city had enough light, so it could be mistaken for daytime. Gustav found his way back to the bottom of the skyscraper to complete the system's last daily task for today. He arrived on the road and started walking towards the massive spatial ring in the middle of the road. He arrived in front of the spatial ring, which was similar to the size of a 2-story building. The spatial ring had a purplish and blue wall of energy surrounding it. The spatial ring occasionally cackled with purplish electric-like arcs running across the body. Time to try this. Gustav smiled as he walked forward and jumped into it. Swing. Gustav found himself in a world of purple and blue as he felt pulling force from every direction, trying to rip his body to shreds. HNMHHH. Gustav groaned in pain as he tried moving forward, so he would appear on the other side, but the pulling force around him held him in place. Rip, rip. His clothes were ripped to shreds in a few moments, and his skin started being pulled in all directions. Damn. It was worse than I expected. Gustav thought his body defense would be able to handle the pulling force, but he was already starting to feel pain, even though he had only stayed in here for a few moments. Gustav didn't know that if it were another mixed blood, they would have been ripped to shreds already, even if they were at the serial rank. HMMPP. Gustav pushed himself forward, managing to take a step, but the moment he did, cuts started appearing on his body. HMMPP. He took another step forward, and the different parts of his flesh started being ripped apart. Flesh-hardening bloodline has been activated. Gustav activated the bloodline he stole from Angie's assaulter back then in Atrahea City. Rocks appeared all over his body, and in a few moments, his entire body had been covered up. He took another step forward, but this time he felt less pain, even though the rocks on his body were cracking and being ripped from his body at a fast speed. Gustav managed to take another step forward, and now the exit was right in front of him. Crumble, crumble, crumble. The pulling force had increased exponentially, causing his body to return back to normal. Gashes started appearing all over Gustav's body as he struggled to raise one foot up. Rip, rip, rip. He could even hear the sounds of his flesh being ripped at different parts, and his regeneration was unable to keep up. Kyra! Gustav shouted out as he pushed his body forward with force and managed to make the next step. Swee! He arrived on the other side of the spatial ring in the vicinity of a trading area with different food shops. Gustav breathed in and out rapidly as he stared at himself. His entire figure had been soaked with blood, his hair disheveled, and his nose dislocated. He was naked, but his face wouldn't be recognized in this state due to it being soaked with blood. There goes another good clothing, Gustav said internally, but he wasn't really bothered. Situations like this always occurred. He stared at the system notification in his line of sight and smiled. Daily tasks completed 3/3 walk through a spatial ring. The system is truly trying to kill me, Gustav said internally with a wry smile. It was well known that only vehicles could go through a spatial ring due to what Gustav had just experienced a while ago. This was why the teleportation circles were constructed for pedestrians' easy movement, which was why the spatial ring was always in the middle of the road, while teleportation circles were on sidewalks. Well, no pain, no gain. Hopefully, the rewards will be good, Gustav said internally as he turned around. Oh, the best time to use teleportation circle. Gustav paused his movement as he noticed the spatial ring was right behind him. Swoosh! He dashed towards the nearest teleportation circle and disappeared within it. At the top of a building on the far west side, a person in a black mask grabbed hold of the flying camera in front of them and voiced out, "I got him." Our next scoop is going to bring us big cash. Several minutes later, Gustav had arrived back home. It was around 4:30 a.m. at this moment. He instantly went to shower to wash off all the blood before putting on a new set of clothing. Chapter 304. He immediately went to shower to wash off all the blood before putting on a new set of clothing. After he was done with showering, Gustav moved back to his bed, but not to sleep, instead to channel his bloodline. It was still very early in the morning, so the weather was very cool, which was why this was the perfect time to channel his bloodline. The heart pumps blood faster when the weather is cool due to constricted blood vessels, so Gustav usually made use of this channel his bloodline more. The anatomy of mixed bloods is different from that of normal humans and Slarkovs. However, they were still similarities, which was why Gustav was able to use this to his advantage. The temperature of the room suddenly became lower than before as Gustav breathed out a line of mist from his nostrils as he began the channeling process. The day went by in a flash, and Gustav spent it following his planned routine. Angie came over later in the evening after he was done to call him over to join her family for dinner. Angie's little brother was so hyped up seeing Gustav. He felt like a celebrity was in their midst. Gustav didn't come over too often, so even though they were neighbors, Angie's little brother didn't see him all the time. Big bro Gustav, they said you defeated 100 participants by yourself, Angie's brother voiced out with a look of excitement as they ate. Not up to that. A lot lesser, Gustav replied before downing down another spoonful of food. Amazing you even surpassed those in other cities, Angie's brother voiced out again. He was similar to Angie, quite talkative, and also had a horn on his forehead with silver-colored hair. However, he was shy to strangers but talkative to people he was familiar with. He used to be very silent when Gustav was around them in the past, but now that he had grown accustomed to Gustav's presence in the neighborhood, he showed his true character. "Come on, Phil, don't disturb him while he's eating," their mom voiced out. "No, it's okay," Gustav dismissed as he ate. "My classmates will never believe that you live just next door," Phil voiced out. Angie's parents smiled and shook their heads as they discussed lightly while eating. Angie had a face full of smiles as she ate. "Thanks for the meal," Gustav said after the dinner was over. Both parents nodded with a smile on their faces. "Please take care of our daughter in the future," Angie's mother suddenly voiced out. "I'm sure he will," Angie's father added. "Mom, what are you saying?" Angie's face turned a shade of red as she voiced out. She turned towards the side and sneakily stared at Gustav's face. Gustav nodded before standing up. "Can I see you for a minute, sir?" Gustav said to Angie's father before walking towards the door. "Bye. Big brother Gustav," Phil voiced out. Angie's heart raced as she wondered why Gustav would want to see her father. Gustav and Angie's father walked out and stood by the door to discuss. "So, what would you like to discuss with me?" Angie's father asked. "I want to hire a manager for my hunter agency." Gustav started speaking. Some minutes later, Angie's father returned. Angie, as well as her mother and brother, were sitting on the sofas with intrigued looks. "Father, what did he discuss with you?" Angie was the first to voice out. Her father first stared at then her mother and brother. "Ha, is that why you're still up?" he asked with a burst of light laughter. Angie blushed in embarrassment, but she still didn't back down. "It's a discussion between us men." "Don't be too nosy," Angie father voiced out as he laughed even more. Angie stared at her father with a look of suspicion after hearing that. "Oh, I see now. Big sis Angie wants big brother Gustav to become," Phil was saying when Angie quickly covered his mouth. "Shush, brat," she muttered while covering his mouth with a look of intensity. Their mother and father laughed lightly as they prepared to go to bed. Back in Gustav's apartment, he proceeded to his reading table to do some research. "Hopefully, he'll think very well about my proposal," Gustav said internally as he turned on his computer. Just like that, 2 days went by, and Gustav had stuck to his routine all through. It was Wednesday, the day he and Miss Amy planned to meet up, so he left home immediately after finishing his morning routines. Gustav and Miss Amy made plans to meet at her house this time, instead of the Gammy dojo. They wanted to have a discussion first before resuming training. Miss Amy had postponed her trip out of the city. She wanted to wait until Gustav had left for the MBO training camp. Miss Amy happened to live somewhere close to the outskirts of the city, just like Gustav, but her neighborhood was on the western side of the city, unlike Gustav's, which was on the eastern side. She stayed in a bungalow apartment. It was nothing fancy as one would have imagined. It was just a simple house, and she stayed alone within. Gustav was a little surprised because he had not expected someone like Miss Amy, who had a princess-like status, to live in such a place. However, when Miss Amy mentioned that her mother was given this kind of treatment in their household, Gustav understood. Miss Amy's family happened to be a very large one that owned practically a quarter of the city, so their place of dwelling was like a mini-city. According to her, every branch of the family had a building of its own, but her mother was cast out of theirs by her father and relatives. So she lived in one of the small quarters for guards and maids. Miss Amy always visited her mother, so she was used to this kind of simple living. Besides, being someone who had completed lots of tricky MBO missions in many places, living in this kind of apartment was nothing to her. So, are you going to tell me what your real power is now? Miss Amy asked as Gustav sat from across her in the living room. Chapter 305. So, are you going to tell me what your real power is now? Miss Amy asked as Gustav sat from across her in the living room. Gustav leaned back on the chair with a contemplative look. Well, I guess it's only fair I do since you already revealed a lot to me, Gustav responded. Well, then go on with it. I'm all ears, Miss Amy said while lifting the mug in front of her to take a sip of tea. I can steal bloodlines and make them my own, Gustav revealed bluntly. At first, Miss Amy's face was still normal, but then she processed his words. Spiffed. Her eyes widened as she spat out her tea by mistake and coughed repeatedly. Miss Amy, are you okay? Gustav asked with a look of worry. Come again. You can do what? Miss Amy asked after calming down. I can steal bloodlines. And use them as mine. Gustav repeated his previous words. What? Miss Amy still couldn't believe her ears. She knew Gustav could use more than one power, but she had no idea that it was because he could steal bloodlines. She always thought this was due to his power of transformation. Are you telling me that you also have more than one bloodline? Miss Amy asked. Yes. Well, Gustav answered with a contemplative look. He wondered if he should tell Miss Amy that he actually had up to 30 bloodlines at the moment, but then he discarded that idea and decided to keep that information to himself. Miss Amy's eyes were still slightly widened for a few more seconds before she calmed down. So that's why, Miss Amy realized, as she remembered something. How did this happen? Or have you always had that ability? Miss Amy asked. I had an unexpected encounter at the mountainside several months back. A star slammed into the mountain area. I got knocked out and woke up the next morning with this ability. Gustav omitted some parts of the story as he narrated. Ben, Charles, Gordon, and the others. Was that you? Miss Amy asked. Gustav nodded in response. I have their bloodlines in my possession right now, he added. Gustav activated Beast transformation, and his left arm morphed into that of the mutated bull, while on his right arm, a milky light coated it. Miss Amy couldn't describe how she was feeling after this revelation. She now understood why Gustav kept it to himself all this time, even though they had become very close. She was glad he finally revealed it to her. Gustav, I don't need to tell you that you shouldn't reveal this to anyone else, right? Miss Amy asked with a solemn look. Gustav nodded in reply. Everyone powerful would come after you if they ever figured this out, so no matter how much you trust a person, never reveal it to them, Miss Amy advised. Gustav understood this very well. He knew that no matter how he trusted a person, if they weren't powerful enough, they could end up falling into the hands of his future enemies and reveal this information. This was why he wasn't bothered with revealing this to Miss Amy. Miss Amy and Gustav conversed for a few more minutes before Miss Amy revealed something to Gustav. I never thought of a repayment method for saving and training you because I wasn't helping you to receive something in return, Miss Amy stated. My mother was just like you, low-graded bloodline. I was curious to see what would happen when someone like you, who has been bullied day in and out, was granted the power to fight back. I wasn't disappointed by the outcome. It was initially just a kind of experiment for me, but now. Miss Amy stared at Gustav with a loving gaze as she stopped talking and took a sip from her mug. Gustav was curious about the completion of Miss Amy's statement, but he could already tell that she wouldn't complete it. There's only one thing I want from you now, Miss Amy started speaking again, after dropping her mug. And that is, Gustav asked, don't become like those rotten and corrupt bastards. If possible, as you rise in power, try changing the embryo, Miss Amy said. Oh. Gustav placed his hand on his chin as he muttered. Miss Amy and Gustav later headed to the Gammy dojo to train for a few hours before Gustav headed back home. At the dojo, reporters had gathered there when they caught wind that he was there. However, when he was leaving, he transformed into someone else, so no one was able to recognize him. It was around 4 p.m. in the evening when he got home. The instant Gustav arrived in front of his apartment building, he met Angie standing in front with a bunch of people. Gustav, she called out his name as she approached him. Gustav exclaimed with a look of suspicion because he could tell that something was amiss. What is it? Gustav asked Angie. Your parents are here to see you, she voiced out. What? Parents? Gustav voiced out with a confounded look. Yes. Now I see where you got your blonde hair from. Angie smiled in delight as she voiced out while pointing at Gustav's parents up ahead that was being interviewed by some reporters. Gustav didn't notice them at first because of the reporters surrounding them, but now he was able to see them clearly. His mother was smiling and answering the questions of these reporters while his father stood by her side. They mentioned how they trained Gustav to become the person he was today. The frown on Gustav's face deepened as he turned to the side and walked towards his apartment. Angie was surprised by his sudden action and moved to stop him. Are you not going to meet them? Angie asked. I don't have parents, Gustav said as he continued walking forward. Angie was utterly confused at this point and stood still staring at his back for a few moments. The reporters had noticed Gustav at this point, as well as Gustav's parents. They all moved towards him happily. Hey, son. His mother and father voiced out as they arrived in front of him with smiles on their faces. Chapter 306. Hey, son. His mother and father voiced out as they arrived in front of him with smiles on their faces. The reporters brought their mics to Gustav's face as bright flashes of fluorescent light flickered repeatedly. Gustav, tell us about your journey with your parents. How did they train you to become the best? The reporters voiced one after the other as they crowded Gustav's path. Angie was behind, observing the look on Gustav's face. She could already tell that something wasn't right from the way he responded earlier, and she was more sure of that now. Gustav stared at everyone around him with a cold look. His expression turned even colder when he saw the way his father and mother were smiling at the cameras and touching him in an intimate way. The reporters kept throwing questions at Gustav, and since he didn't reply, his parents kept voicing out lies while putting. Right, son? Behind their every answer. Gustav suddenly raised both of his arms and grabbed his father's and mother's hands that were currently on his left and right shoulder. I do not like making contact with filth. Too bad. You'll have to get rid of these clothes, since both of your poisonous hands have turned it rotten, Gustav voiced out with a cool tone as he pushed his way forward. The entire place suddenly turned silent upon hearing that. The faces of the reporters, as well as Gustav's parents, turned weird. They had a look of, "Did I hear that properly? You had better turn off those cameras and delete the recordings. You just interviewed the biggest clowns in history," Gustav voiced out as he pushed forward, amidst the many reporters, to create a path for himself. "But son," his father was about to say when Gustav interrupted. "I don't have parents." Gustav turned his face around to give both of them a chilling gaze. "Stop masquerading about as parents of a kid you never raised," Gustav voiced out with a dark look. The reporters could feel their bodies grow cold due to the intensity. It felt like Gustav would even kill them if they continued bothering him. Gustav turned around and kept walking forward. "Losers," he muttered underneath his breath, but those words did not escape the ears of reporters as well as Gustav's birth parents. His father turned speechless as a wave of embarrassment washed over him. "You ungrateful wench. Is this how you repay your mother?" Gustav's mother voiced out as Gustav kept walking forward. He had gotten out of the encirclement of reporters, however he still heard her statement, but he didn't bother replying. "You little brat," she shouted out again as she squatted and pulled off her shoe and ran towards Gustav from behind. It was so sudden that the reporters and her husband hadn't expected it. The path Gustav created within the previous encirclement of the reporters was where she followed. She transformed her shoe into a small ice pole as she arrived behind Gustav in a few moments and swung the shoe towards the back of his head. Gustav, who was still moving forward like he didn't sense a thing before, suddenly turned around. Swai. He shifted towards the right side, dodging the swung-out shoe, causing his mother to fall forward due to missing her target. Gustav suddenly turned around with fast speed, while swinging out the back of his left palm. Swee-yi-yi. His arm traveled towards the face of his mother, that was still tripping forward. She was neither able to dodge it nor counter. She could only watch as the back of his palm arrived before her left cheek. Pa! The sound of a stinging slap reverberated across the environment. Pieces of teeth, along with blood, flew out of Gustav's mother mouth as she was sent catapulting towards the side. Her body traveled across the air in an arc as her cheeks rippled intensely. Bang! She slammed into the wall on the side and passed out instantly. Half of her face had been scalded completely and swollen. Gasp! Everyone in the vicinity was shocked after witnessing the scene. It played out way too fast, so none of them were able to prevent it. Isn't she his mother? Everyone wondered. This wasn't something anyone would expect a son to do to his mother. The resemblance was there, so they had no doubt that they were truly related. Gustav, who was the culprit, turned around to start walking towards the stairs again. He strolled casually like he did nothing at all. "Take your sorry excuse of a wife and get out of here. I don't want you to cross path with you both ever again, or the implications will be severe," Gustav voiced out from up ahead as he climbed the stairs. The faces of everyone was full of awe, as some of them went to render assistance to Gustav's mother along with his father. Angie just stood in place behind them with a confused look. She was feeling conflicted, not knowing whether to help Gustav's mother or follow Gustav up the stairs. After a few more seconds of contemplation, she decided to go upstairs and get answers from Gustav about the whole situation. At the moment where the reporters were making their reports and giving a breakdown of the situation to their news agency, Gustav was already in his apartment preparing tea for himself. He pulled off his jacket and sat on the chair with an unbothered look. He turned on his holographic TV, and just as he expected, different kinds of news were already flying around about what went down a few moments ago. A footage of him slapping his mother hard was currently being displayed. Gustav brought his mug to his mouth and was about to take a sip when he heard a knock on the door. His hand movement paused, and he slowly brought the mug back down. Without even seeing the face of the person, he already knew who it was. 2 narrations in one day, I guess. Gustav sighed internally as he made a hand gesture, and the door slid open. SHHHSSHH. Angie walked in just as he had expected. Gustav, what was that? Why did you? Okay, I understand why you did that, but what's going on? Angie voiced out with a conflicted look. Chapter 307. She had always wanted to ask Gustav about his parents. Still, any time anything regarding his relatives was mentioned, his reaction made her suspicious. She always felt something was amiss, but she didn't want him to feel like she was too nosy, so she refrained from asking. Sit down, Gustav proposed while pointing at the sofa opposite him. Angie did, as she was told, and sat while staring at Gustav. Tea? Gustav asked as he stood to his feet. You know, USH. Angie was speaking when Gustav interrupted. Tea it is, Gustav said, and went to prepare tea for her too. How can he remain so unbothered even after what just happened? Angie wondered with a look of contemplation. She already knew that this would be a hot topic around the city, since Gustav has become quite popular now. And she knew Gustav wasn't an idiot. He definitely knew that things like this could cause a stain on his reputation, which would make people speak bad about him wherever he went. This was why she wondered why he was so unbothered. She had no idea that Gustav had already gone through such, which was why he wasn't even bothered by these kinds of things anymore. Gustav brought back the tea and gave it to Angie before sitting down. Now, are you going to tell me what's happening? Angie asked with a look of curiosity. Take a sip first, Gustav said as he also raised his mug to his lips. Angie rolled her eyes and also took a sip. Afterward, she stared at Gustav, and Gustav stared back at her. So, what did you want to know? Gustav asked. You said you don't have parents, so who are those people out there? Angie asked with a confused look. Not my parents, Gustav responded before taking another sip of tea. So, who are they? Angie asked again. The people who biologically brought me into existence. But we share no familial ties, so they are not my parents, Gustav replied. Angie's face squeezed up a bit as she heard Gustav's words. I know he is always harsh, but he sounds extremely harsh right now. There must be a good reason for this. Angie thought before decided to ask Gustav again. Do you mind elaborating? Why do you not see them as your parents? Did something happen in the past? Angie asked as her voice turned softer with each question. Angie, what is your definition of a parent? Gustav asked. The question took Angie by surprise. So she thought for a few seconds before responding. Well, my definition of a parent. The most supportive people in your life, they struggle to make your dreams come true. Your happiness is their responsibility. They never give up on you, no matter the situation. Angie kept mentioning a few more things to Gustav's hearing. After she was done, Gustav stared at her for a few seconds before replying. Now think of everything you mentioned in reverse. Angie was first confused by his line of thought until he finished his statement. Those people you met outside did the opposite to me, Gustav stated. Angie's eyes widened as she came to a realization. She started to recall how Gustav mentioned he was known as trash to a lot of people and started making some connections. Listen up. Gustav started narrating how he grew up and a lot of things that centered around his life. The bullying and his uncaring parents were only concerned with creating a kid with a good bloodline grade. The neglect high on in all aspects, which wasn't expected of parents. By the time he was done with the narration, droplets of tears were already falling from Angie's eyes. No matter how many times she used her sleeves to rub her eyes, the tears kept falling. She stared at Gustav with reddened eyes as she imagined all he had to go through. She knew bullying was a thing, and it was even worse for mixed bloods with low bloodline grades. However, she had never heard of parents abandoning their own child because of low bloodline grades. The why are the big, jest, and shameless scums I have ever met in my life, Angie whimpered with a sad look as she voiced out. Nah, it's okay. I don't care about it anymore, Gustav said as he took another sip of his tea with a dark look. Angie stood up and walked towards him. Gustav noticed her appearance in front of him and voiced out a low, with a confused expression. Gustav suddenly felt Angie's soft hands on his head. The next thing he knew, she pulled his head towards her chest. In the next moment, his line of sight was covered by Angie's short black blouse. He felt his head being pressed against a pair of extremely soft, round, and squishy bumps. His nostrils were immediately filled with Angie's sweet apple mint fragrance as she hugged his head to her chest. She rubbed his hair softly as droplets of her tears fell onto his hair. It's okay. You have me. You have Miss Amy, and you're definitely going to have more people that will cherish you in the future, Angie said with a caring tone. Gustav was speechless. He didn't know how to respond, neither did he know how to feel at this moment. But one thing he knew was, he was feeling very comfortable in her embrace. Gustav subconsciously raised his arms and hugged them around Angie's waist, returning her tight embrace. The NKU, later by night, news had circulated about how Gustav treated his parents all across the city and even outside. Different theories began to spread, mostly bad, and some of them even labeled him as an ungrateful child who disrespected older people. Gustav, who happened to be the topic of discussion, was in his apartment about to eat dinner that he cooked himself. His dining area was filled with all sorts of assorted foods. Just when he was about to sit, he heard a knock on the door. Gustav already sensed the approach of someone earlier, but he thought the person would head to Angie's apartment. To his displeasure, the person was actually here for him. Gustav walked towards the door before making a gesture for it to open up. SSHHSSHH. The door slid open, and what appeared in Gustav's line of sight was an almost 8-foot-tall giant in a business suit. Gustav raised his head, so he would be able to take a glance at the face of the man. Sir Gustav, I have been tasked with the assignment of giving you this invitation cube, the man voiced out in a surprisingly light tone as he stretched out his hand towards Gustav. Within his hand was a baby palm-sized black cube. Chapter 308. Sir Gustav, I have been tasked with the assignment of giving you this invitation cube, the man voiced out in a surprisingly light tone as he stretched out his hand towards Gustav. Within his hand was a baby palm-sized black cube. Sir Gustav. Sounds like a butler from a big family. I wonder what they want with me. Gustav wondered as he stretched out his hand to collect the cube. After receiving it, the huge man bowed and turned around to leave. That was when Gustav noticed there was one more person. A small lady in a black business suit was right behind him, and they turned around to leave together. Gustav squinted his eyes with a look of suspicion because he was unable to sense any presence besides that of the huge man. Both of their auras mixed together, as they moved like they were one, which was why Gustav was only able to sense one presence instead of two. Gustav closed his door and turned around to head back to his dining area. Fwop! Gustav threw the cube towards his reading table on the other end before heading to the dining. Now, where was I? Gustav stared at the exotic dishes with a smile as he sat outside the building. The large man and small lady were having a conversation. Do you think he will attend? The lady asked with a surprisingly deep voice. Of course he will. No one will be able to resist such intriguing offer by the one and only Master Gon, the giant man said with a tone of confidence. In fact, I'm sure he's checking it out now and shivering in excitement. The giant man laughed lightly as he added, I feel like that kid isn't as simple as you think, the lady muttered. No matter how complex he is, he won't be able to refuse, the giant man responded. Underscore, 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 underscore. The night went by in a flash, and Gustav woke up by his usual time. He felt especially energized after making himself a nice feast the night before. He didn't cook so much like that for himself every time, because cooking dinner like that also took time to complete, since it was a combination of several exotic dishes. Gustav walked towards his reading table. He wanted to check on the new applications that had been submitted recently for those who had thoughts of joining his agency. Oh, I forgot about this. Gustav stared at the black cube beside his computer on the reading table. Gustav reached out for it and picked it up. Now, let's see what this whole invitation shenanigan is all about, Gustav muttered and tapped onto the cube. Trin! A bright flash of light enveloped the reading table area, and in the next moment, a holographic projection of a man was displayed. Hello, young Gustav. I am Mr. Gon, the man in the projection voiced out. He had triangular-shaped blue-colored hair with a long goatee. He looked like a 30-year-old man with a lot of swag due to the big black fashion glasses on his face. I'm sure you must be wondering why this was sent to you, so we'll go straight to the point, Mr. Gon said. Gustav did not bother replying to him, since he knew this was a pre-recorded projection. This is a personal invitation to my manor for my upcoming 70th birthday, Mr. Gon stated. Oh, he's going to be 70 years soon. Gustav was not surprised by this information, even though the man looked to be around 30 years of age. I will like for you to be in attendance. If you show up on that day, I will owe you a favor, and you can ask for whatever you wish from me, Mr. Gon said with a smile. Seems like a bait, Gustav said internally after hearing that. Believe me, you can ask anything of me so long as I witness your attendance, Mr. Gon added. The date and venue of the celebration will be revealed at the end of the footage, Mr. Gon voiced out before the projection disappeared. Just as his projection disappeared, it was replaced with several glowing characters that revealed the date as well as the venue of Mr. Gon's birthday. After a few seconds, the cube dissolved into ash. Who is this Mr. Gon? Gustav wondered out loud after memorizing the venue and date. He had never heard of him, but Gustav could guess he was a pretty influential person and must be from one of the mighty households in the city. He wasn't too prominent in social issues and gatherings since he preferred spending his time doing research on the internet, which was why he didn't know who this Mr. Gon was. Gustav decided to make his findings before he would think of whether he would attend or not. The mistake the butlers made was they had expected Gustav to know about Mr. Gon since he was almost influential in the city. They had no idea that Gustav had never been to any social gathering or even had access to TV and the internet before he started living alone. Gustav proceeded to check on his mails first to see the applicants for open positions in his agency. There were hundreds of mixed bloods who were interested in joining the Crimson Hunting Agency. However, Gustav was quite picky, so he went through their portfolios one after the other, and even after 30 minutes had passed, he still wasn't interested in anyone. He had picked a person he saw as suitable for the position of secretary and another 2 persons as delivery agents, but aside from that, he wanted some more people on the field. He hadn't seen anyone that suited his tastes yet. I guess I'll just for these 3 first. Gustav picked 3 that happened to be the most outstanding among the ones he has checked out. 3 holographic projections of 3 people appeared in front of Gustav. It was 2 women and a man. Gustav observed their portfolios and their abilities written within for the umpteenth time. 6 interviews today, then, Gustav muttered before sending a venue and time to the 6 he picked. Chapter 309. Now, let's find out who this Mr. Gon is, Gustav said after closing his mail window and entering an internet site. Several hours later, Gustav was done with his usual morning routine, and it was around 10 a.m. Today was Thursday, so he wasn't meeting Miss Amy. However, he still had plans of training by himself. Gustav decided to visit the storage facility he rented some time ago to check on the place first. It wasn't too far from the edge of the city, so it only took Gustav a few minutes to get there. He used his leg as a means of transportation this time. Gustav arrived at the massive bungalow-like building and went in. There will be some people moving to and fro the vicinity, assisting Braun in moving out some rectangular-shaped coolers where the body parts of these mixed breeds were kept. Since Gustav didn't employ anyone else besides Braun and Dirk, they had to receive external help for the delivery of the body parts to various places. Boss. Braun noticed Gustav and quickly approached him. Where's Dirk? Gustav asked. He's out surveying the next hunting area, Braun answered. His camouflage ability is finally being put to work, Gustav said internally before responding. Carry on, Gustav said with a dismissive expression. He didn't want to disturb the work process, which was why he told Braun to continue. Braun bowed slightly and went back to join the external help they borrowed for delivery. Gustav looked around the storage facility. It was cold due to the cooling generators and appliances they used in keeping the body of the mixed breeds fresh. Rows and columns of rectangular-shaped black-colored appliances could be seen all arranged in different formats all across the place. Gustav turned around and was about to leave when, bam, the door was forcefully kicked open and 3 people walked in. One was a green-bearded, middle-aged man with a massive circular scar at the back of his bald head. The one in the middle was a young lady with ring piercings on her nose, ears, eyes, mouth, and neck. She had long red hair that had metallic things attached to it. The third was a man with a buff stature and purple-colored head with black eyes. The 3 of them looked quite menacing as they walked towards Braun on the other side, totally neglecting the presence of Gustav. Not this people again, Braun said internally as he noticed their presence. What do you want? He asked with a wary expression. You know what we want, Braun, the man with a green beard voiced out. I don't, Braun replied. Stop playing stupid and give us our cut of your last month's sales, the man with dark eyes and purple-colored face voiced out. You have no cut. Get out. Braun shouted as he turned around, but then the lady in the middle stretched out her hand and grabbed him by the collar. Slurp. She licked her lips seductively and stared at Braun. You would deprive us of our share. You know, I can also deprive your wife of you, Mr. Braun. She winked after saying this. Let me go. You witch. Braun grabbed hold of her hand, yanked it away from his collar forcefully. Oh, so feisty. I like that, Mr. Braun, but there's more than one of us, the lady said to his hearing. While I have my way with you, the rest of them will trash the place if you don't give us our cut right now, the lady added. Braun stared at them with a look of pity. You have no idea who you're messing with, he stated. We don't care. Whoever he is, we will deal with him if he messes with us, the green-bearded man voiced out. Are you sure about that? The voice of a young man could be heard behind them. Huh? The 3 turned around to stare at the person with a surprised look. It was a barely 6-foot-tall kid with blonde hair and suave looks. They had noticed him before, but ignored his presence because they didn't think much of him. They didn't know when Gustav crept up behind them. Who are you? The green-bearded man voiced out. However, before Gustav could answer, the eyes of the lady widened as she stared at Gustav. I know you, the number 1 MBO entrance test participant, she said with a look of excitement. You are Gustav, she voiced out. Huh? Gustav? Both men stated with a look of disbelief while staring at her before turning back to stare at Gustav. Oh, wait, now that you mention it, this kid truly does look like him. Oh, my goodness, he's truly the one. Both men, too, were unable to believe their eyes as they finally recognized Gustav. He looked a bit different from when they saw him on TV. And their minds also subconsciously discarded any thoughts of him being the one at first due to their current location. No one would expect to see the number 1 participant in a place like this. What are you doing here? The three of them voiced out with looks of disbelief. He's my boss, before Gustav could answer. Braun voiced out. Huh? Wait, come again? The red-haired lady voiced out as she turned around to stare at Braun. You heard him right. I own this place, and Braun is my employee, Gustav stated while folding both his arms and staring at the expressions of the three. They all had looks of disbelief and wariness as they looked around. The red-haired lady, who was obviously their leader, wanted to say something but couldn't find the words even after several seconds had passed. We cannot afford to offend him, she said internally as she stared at Gustav's face, trying to read his expression. Ahem, the red-haired lady coughed repeatedly. Mr. Gustav, haha, we are sorry to have bothered you. We will now take our leave, she said while giving her other two subordinates signals with her eyes. They instantly moved towards the side and started heading to the doors with looks of fear. Hold on, Gustav suddenly voiced out from behind. I haven't asked you to leave, have I? The three instantly paused in their tracks upon hearing that and turned around slowly with wary looks. Chapter 3:10. I haven't asked you to leave, have I? The three instantly paused in their tracks upon hearing that and turned around slowly with wary looks. Mr. Gustav, we really respect you a lot, so please let us go this time. We won't cause any more trouble, the lady with red hair voiced out with a wry smile as she once again turned around with her subordinates. Nobody leaves, Gustav voiced out and snapped his fingers. Pa, bang, bang, bang. Metallic doors suddenly started slamming down in the different parts of the storage room, trapping everyone within. The three of them looked around and at themselves with worried looks before turning back to face Gustav. Look, Mr. Gustav, we know you're now a big shot, but we won't accept being cornered, the lady gnashed her teeth as she voiced out with a look of determination. If you want to get rid of us, we won't go down without putting up a fight first. Shack. Her hair turned into shake-stabbing blades as they floated above her head. The man with green beard started transforming, and in a few seconds, he had a lizard-like appearance with moderate-sized bat wings. As for the man with a purple-colored head, black fire sprouted out of his head and started floating above it while his fists were also coated in these black flames. Braun also prepared himself for a fight and was about to step forward when Gustav raised his hand to give him a signal to stay back. Gustav walked at a leisurely pace towards the three, who were slowly moving backwards. We're all serial ranked. You are way in over your head, kid, the purple-head man with black flames floating above him voiced out. Gustav arrived in front of them. However, instead of a battle stance, he spoke. Can we have a business talk over there? Gustav gestured at the office area towards the eastern area. This was one of the small rooms he prepared as an office for himself, since he was the one managing the agency right now. Huh? The three of them voiced out with a surprised look. They felt their ears were playing tricks on them, since Gustav's action gave them the intention that he harbored nefarious thoughts against them. Gustav didn't repeat himself. Instead, he started walking in the direction of the office. The three decided to follow after him after staring at one another suspiciously. They arrived in the small office, and Gustav sat down in his office seat while gesturing for only the red-haired lady to sit. The other two had to stand beside her. First of all, I would like to know who you work for, Gustav said while staring at the lady. She stared back at him for a few seconds before she mentioned their hunting team, Eagle Wings, which happened to be one of the few in the city. She went on to explain that, unlike other cities, there was no main hunters organization that controlled other hunters organizations within the city. This was due to the fact that hunters couldn't hunt down mixed breeds within the city. A lot of other cities had main hunter organizations that protected the rights of the hunters and collected their share of every agency's generated monthly or weekly income. According to her, this wasn't created in Plankton City because they didn't hunt inside, and those that hunted on the outskirts of the city hardly managed to acquire lots of mixed breeds, unless they went farther into the unexplored territories, which were quite dangerous. However, they had gotten word that Crimson Hunting Agency had been selling parts of mixed breeds easily and had them in abundance. They did their research and noticed that this was truly the case, seeing the way deliveries were being made all across different parts of the city. Since their team wasn't getting as much or making as much money, their leader gave them the task of disguising themselves as this main hunters organization that protected the rights of hunters, so they would be able to extort them. Apparently, they had come here several times, but Braun wasn't buying into their bullshit and always told them off. However, he didn't inform Gustav of this because he didn't want Gustav to think he wasn't capable enough. The two at the side heard the narration of their female leader, who happened to be the vice captain of their hunting team, and were shocked that she revealed everything to Gustav. They had been trying to signal her to not reveal everything, but she totally ignored their signs. "Oh, I see." Gustav nodded with a look of understanding after she was done. "You seem like a sharp one, so I'll just get to the point," Gustav said before leaning back against his chair with a poker expression plastered on his face. "I want to hire all three of you," Gustav stated. "What?" The two, besides the lady, voiced out with a look of disbelief. However, the red-haired lady wasn't so surprised. She knew Gustav wouldn't just call them over to his office for no good reason. "It is exactly as you have heard. I want you three to be a part of the Crimson Hunters Agency." The two men still had looks of surprise on their faces as they heard that, and were unable to give a response for a few moments. "Join my hunting agency to receive better benefits than you used to in this what was it called again? The name of your team?" Gustav asked. "Eagle Win." Before the purple-headed man could complete his statement, Gustav cut in. "Nobody cares," he voiced out. "The purple-headed man. The green-bearded man." "Join me," Gustav added as he joined his palms together on the table and leaned his jaw on his raised fists. They stared at each other repeatedly while the red-haired lady smiled and stared back at Gustav. "What proposal did you have in mind?" she asked with a seductive smirk. Gustav returned the smirk before replying. "What is your current income?" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.